tell if Councillor Anderson is online?
Working with him right now. He is not yet.
Just waiting for Councillor Anderson.
It's all here.
Consolation, I was like having lunch today and I put my teacup down and then picked up my lunch bag. My lunch, 2 other people's lunches, and my newspaper.
Oh.
So. I'm sure that was good. I feel like we need the Jeopardy music. I'm not sure if it's meant to be a circle, but it always makes me think of phylogenetic trees.
I don't know. I just had to pick one.
Right.
It was the less obtrusive and more space.
I understand. I was looking at squash phylogenetic trees strangely today. I looked up something. Rabbit hole. That happens. I have never heard of a Bengali squash, so I was trying to figure out what a Bengali squash was.
The mayor commented on my color selection over an update. It's like it's more to do with I was in a Christmassy mood than anything else.
Yeah, it struck me right away. Why is this red?
I know, right? It should be red fading into green if you were really being Christmassy.
Oh well, there you go. Yes.
Can't seem to get to the dewdrop. I couldn't find it on the OneDrive.
we got sucked out into the sea.
Bitten by a shark randomly, you know.
All of those things have been happening down there in the last couple of weeks. It's been insane.
It's been all crazy.
Yeah.
What part is he in?
He's, San Diego area-ish.
Yeah.
I am here.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson.
Let's wait for him to turn on his video.
The
Everyone
ocean
is-
has not taken me yet.
Can we just ask him to turn on his video?
Can you turn on your video camera?
When I press that, it says you cannot start your video because the host has stopped it, which can only lead me to believe I have a face for radio. I don't know. You cannot start your video because the host has stopped it because he feels I am not attractive enough. I don't know.
Just have him try again.
Try it again.
Trying it again. Whoop.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
It was too much.
And there he is. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. The January 8th, 2024 Special Council meeting is called to order at 4:07. This is our first budget meeting for this cycle. Council would like to acknowledge the Ucluelet First Nation on whose traditional territories the District of Ucluelet operates. Audience members and delegates are advised that this proceeding is being video recorded and broadcast on YouTube and Zoom, which may store data on foreign servers. Are there any late items? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Councillor Kennington,
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare, all in favor? That carries. The only report item on this agenda is 4.1, presentation of the draft 2024 to 2028 five-year financial plan. The Chief Administrative Officer will present this report. The floor is yours, Mr. Lawrence.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. To start off, hoping they capturing me here. This is the draft operations and capital budget, and it encapsulates the preliminary expenditures that we're anticipating for 2024 through 2028. The objective of today's meeting is to present the overall budget and then receive comments and feedback from council as to any areas of concerns, any adjustments, any additional works that should be considered within the budget, and then indications of what we're looking at for funding the capital side of the budget moving forward. I am not moving forward. Here we go. So, to date, what we've done is staff have updated our operational and capital budgets starting in September through November. Our pre-budget workshop was completed with council in late November of this year, which covered off the high-level considerations regarding how a budget works and the implications, services that the municipality provides. This presentation, as I mentioned previously, is the operational capital budget, and then if depending on feedback from council and direction from council, we may require an additional meeting towards the end of January to go over any requested changes from council and any impacts that they have on the budget. And then a revised budget would be coming out in February of 2024. This is when we have the completed roll and the full tax implications. So right now we can't forecast those full tax implications because we're still addressing year end, which is December 31st annually. And all of those transactions from 2023 have to clear out for our revenue, expenditures, and all the transfers to reserve have to conclude, which happens in January. So we can't forecast the full extent of any ramifications until that time. Moving on, if everything goes well, we'll have that revised budget in late February, which will start the official public engagement period, which is 30 days where we request feedback from the community on the proposed budget. Those comments would then be encapsulated into another report for council for any last minute adjustments if necessary. And we have the revised roll that comes out on April 1st annually, so that's any adjustments from BC assessment which impacts the tax requisition. That is factored in, and then bylaws are drafted for council's consideration on May 14th, which is the day prior to the deadline for adopting a municipal budget. The first couple of slides here are just very high level. I'll go quickly through them. It's just a reminder of the services that we provide as a municipality. So governance, water, sanitary, legislative, and policy. There's a separate column there on new and recent legislative responsibilities that are coming down. As everybody knows, there's a lot of housing information or housing legislation that's come through, climate adaptation, business continuity plans, accessibility. All of these things add take increased capacity to fund and to manage as we move forward. And as we go along, if the council has any questions about these or I'm going too quickly, please let me know. There's a lot of slides, so I'll try to run through them not too slowly. The other three areas, protective services, so this is fire, wildland urban interface, road rescue, as well as our emergency operations, community services as our recreation, special events, nonprofit supports, agreements, cultural services, and then our community assets. So that's all our infrastructure: roads, sidewalks, boulevard, parking, washrooms, playgrounds, rec facilities, harbor, etc. I will note that council will see a couple of things different in this presentation from previous years. Primarily, that's due to don't undertake CFO work usually all the time, so I've rearranged it a little bit to help myself present it to council. But also, you'll note that Harbor has been removed from the base operational budget, and this is because it's a separate cost center. It is funded independently of everything else, so it's a full cost recovery rather than a what we look at as an operational expense that is bedded in the base funding, which is covered by property taxes. So what guides the budget is council, strategic financial plans, the official community plan, resolutions from the previous year or years, approvals of council through grants and new directives, and then obviously our bylaws and policy. We have a lot of legislative requirements that are incorporated into the budget, how we build a municipal budget, and that's guided through the Community Charter, Local Government Act, Public Sector Accounting Board, Financial Disclosure, Municipal Finance Authority. So this all goes in to dictate how we develop and maintain a budget. And as council knows and the community should know, is that we must have a balanced budget. We cannot run a deficit. That's not permissible for the municipalities to run in a deficit situation. So anything that we do has to be fully funded throughout the 5 years of the budget. To start, we're going to be going over the department overviews. So the departments are a summary of the 2023 approved budget to give council a comparative view of what we were doing this past year. Those numbers are our approved budget. They are not our actuals because we're still finding out what those actuals are. It takes another couple of weeks to get all those last minute numbers in. So it is the approved budget from last year that is in the 2023 columns. Any revenues attributed to the departments, we base it off of anticipated 5-year spending. The department heads utilize this past year's spending as a guideline to forecast what this next year is, as well as what are the operational needs, any new items that have come up. over the course of the year, and also just an inflation component of it because everything gets a little bit more expensive. Usually 2 to 4% is what we try to stay around this for each year. That is a little bit higher this year because everything's gone up significantly over the last year with COVID and supply chain issues and just cost of doing business. For the 25 through 28 years, we've used a 2% to 4% inflation projection. Yeah. So, and just a point of clarity for people, it's just on how it comes out in all of our spreadsheets, and that the negative values are actually revenues, and the black ones are the positive values are actually expenditures. Or yes, so it's a little bit backwards, but that's how the financing systems work, as revenues are actually negatives and expenditures are positives. So just a point of clarity there. So going right into it, administration. So we have, and I've outlined all of the significant changes within the budget. And please, council, if you have any questions throughout this, just ask as we go. It'll be easier to track and hopefully answer those questions as it's presented. We have a summary of the revenues that are associated in general terms with the department. So administration is sort of the finance, general administration of the municipality. Not a huge amount of changes in those funds. Annual grants, that's the gas tax, or not the gas tax grant, the small communities fund that we have every year. It's pretty straightforward. It comes in every year. We get to use that for offsetting administrative operations. Payment in lieu of taxes has to do with Hydro and TELUS. So they provide us a rebate for use of lands and services in the community. And then we have general other fees and cost recovery, and then interest on what is like grant funds that we have received, and we have to track the interest on those funds as well as on our reserves. So that's where the interest occurs for revenue generation. The municipal office is the actual operation of the building itself. So it's just for the operation and supply and maintenance of the building. Administrative expenses are going up a little bit from $958,000 to $1.143. This has partly to do to an approved position for an executive assistant that council made in December, and general increases to administrative costs and staffing and that as we move forward. Information technology is going up a little bit as well. We have to update our website. It's no longer serviceable, so we have to update that one. And the servicing costs are slightly higher than previous with the new software administration. Council will see a little bit of an increase in legal and audit services. Our auditing services went up slightly, $3,000 or $4,000, but our legal fees are increasing. That has to do with some substantial ongoing claims that council is aware of that are making their way through the system. Insurance has also seen a substantial increase. We had a 10.4% increase in insurance costs that are levied out by our insurance companies. So that yielded quite a significant increase. And then financial servicing, I know this one is a little bit confusing. So we have $546,000 in 2023, and that's going down to $235,000. That was the approved budget at the time, and with our past director of finance moving on partway through the year, it was planned that we were going to pay off some debts specific to equipment, but that did not occur because we didn't have a director of finance. So that one was high, but those funds will be transferred over to reserves. It won't be a realized expenditure. So council will see the ongoing expense for debt servicing, and we have a slide near the end of the presentation that demonstrates all the different levels of debt that we currently have. But it'll be around 235, declining from there as debts are paid off. So our main changes within administration is IT software, so just increased software and licensing fees. Legal is going up by, like I said, 15,000. HR and recruitment, that one changes a little bit. It's gone down 25,000. That is primarily because we created a new line for the staff rental housing that we have on the books. We wanted to separate that out, and that staff housing is cost recovered when we rent those to any staff that utilize them. So we're looking at about $46,000 in staff housing. That's 2 rental units. We have hiring a director of finance and a manager of operations, which we're assuming will take those suites on, and then fully cost recover those two houses. Insurance, again, it increased by 25,000, and that was increase in insurance fees and charges. Is there any questions? All right. The next area is council costs. So mayor and council fees, not a substantial amount of changes here. The one that is substantially different is a grant and aid for $35,000 that's being contemplated. Council asked for this to be included within the budget for consideration, and it's attached to a grant application for the Chamber of Commerce. Or I haven't heard from the Chamber of Commerce whether or not they were successful in that grant application. So at this point in time, we've included that in the budget for council's consideration.
I asked about that. They won't know till the end of February.
Okay. So there could be an opportunity to make that adjustment if we get information from them in either positive or not. But if we keep that in, then it's an additional $35,000 expense in 2024, and then it would drop back down in 2025. Our planning and development, council will note that we're projecting a slight decrease in business licenses, and this is more just being conservative in our numbers. So right now we're hitting right around that $210,000 mark for business licensing. We always like to project low on our revenues and high on our expenditures so that we maintain that balanced budget. So there's nothing there to worry about. We're not losing businesses or anything. It's just a mechanism of making sure we're being conservative in our cost estimates and our revenues through business licensing. Permits are going slightly up, and this is representative of the amount of permits that we're experiencing within our planning department. Overall, for planning, there is 3 major or larger changes. Building inspection contract services is going down by 14,000. So we had assistance that was provided under agreement with Tofino to provide some additional support for our building inspector. And that is coming to an end. We're not utilizing that anymore. We still have a mutual aid agreement for covering off of holidays and stuff like that. So if we need each other, we have a reciprocal use agreement that we can still use, but we don't have a dedicated amount of time that we're bringing the Tofino building inspector, who's a level 2, in to support the district. Planning consultants, we're going to see a slight increase in there. This has primarily to do with the amount of new legislation that is coming down the pipes from the province. We're anticipating a higher amount of need for ongoing consultations for updating our various plans for growth, OCP, and other supporting documents that we're required to maintain. There is also the planning salaries and benefits are going up, and this is respective of a new planner that we're proposing, and council supported back in December as well. This is, we've just also got word from the province that they are allocating $160,000 through a grant, a one-time grant, to help support and offset these additional expenses that municipalities are realizing due to the legislation that they're handing down to us. So that $160,000 currently is spread over 2 years within the budget to lessen the impact of that new position. So trying to balance that out a little bit.
Can I just ask a question?
Absolutely.
So who is going to be doing the building inspections then, if we're not using the Tofino person?
Oh, it's still Nicole is our building inspector, so she's full time. So what we were doing is, while she was growing into that position, we had additional support to mentor her in that role as she started in that first two years. Okay. And also, we have a reciprocal agreement for like level 2 and 3 buildings that we contract out those reviews, because Nicole is only a level 1. Well, not only. Nicole is a level 1 building inspector at this time.
Great, thanks.
Could I also ask you, that 160 that's from the 160,000 from the province, is that already spread into this those 2 years? Is that already subtracted from the planning administration?
Right. So yes and no. You will see it later on in the budget as a revenue that's coming in to offset expenses. So when we're developing the budget, the numbers that are presented here are the full cost of the all of the decisions of council, including this position. So that position is now embedded into these numbers. So you'll see that 2023 we had $352,000 in planning administration. So that's all of the administrative costs, not just wages and benefits. In 2024, it's $494, and then it slowly goes up. So that change, part of that change is in that $494, and then it's realized from that point on within the planning administration budget. The revenue is general revenue, so it's not shown in business licenses or permits. It's shown as grant revenue later on in the budget.
Oh, okay. So those numbers would be lesser then. Is that once we factor that in? Is that right?
We will see an additional $160,000 in the budget for this year, right? And then we're allocating that 160 over 2 years, so you'll see $80,000 in 24 and $80,000 in 2025. The other half, the part that we're not utilizing in 2024, would be put into reserves and then brought back out in 2025.
Excellent. Thank you.
I have a question. Whoa, that's a little loud.
Yeah.
So when Monica left, is that position still factored into this? Because obviously we're going to replace her
Correct.
as well as additional planner.
Yes.
So that's already factored in.
Her position already existed. It started in 2022.
Yeah.
And once you put a position into the budget, it is always in there unless you proactively remove it from the budget, which would see a reduction in your expenditures.
Thanks.
For emergency services and management, so our protective service agreements, that is our agreements with other communities. So the Ucluelethat government, ACRD, fire service agreements, and some revenue from responding to calls on the highways. That's we get about $63,000 annually from that. Our operating expenditures are $508,000 in 2024. You'll note the major increase in emergency services is the second portion of the deputy fire chief's position. So we decided last year to fund that over 2 years to lessen that tax burden in over that 2-year period. We spread it out over 2 years instead of just in one. Aside from that, pretty minimal changes within emergency services and EOC. Within recreation, there's a couple of significant changes within recreation that council will see. On the revenue side, so our recreation fees are jumping up by about $60,000. That is because our programs are doing amazingly well. We're seeing a significant increase and return to pre-pandemic levels of participation and programming for adult and children and youth programs. So it's a significant increase in revenues there, and you will see the corresponding expenditures, because we do most of our programs, we try to do them at a full cost recovery basis. The expenditures for instructors and supplies and materials related to providing these programs goes up accordingly. So it kind of goes off in a wash. Council will also see that we have a new line item this year. I've separated it out this year specifically because it's new, and that is the Lighthouse or Amphitrite House. We're budgeting $28,600 for the operation, maintenance, supplies and materials. So this is washroom supplies, electricity, hydro, insurance, all of the things that go into operating the lighthouse once it starts. It'll go up slightly every year as we move forward, and then there will be a discussion, obviously, of what do we want to do on for fees and charges. How do we want to use that building? There's an agenda item on council's for council's discussion tomorrow at the regular meeting. But at this point in time, we're looking at it as a cost recovery process. So the programs and possible rentals and a lease agreement would offset this cost completely, and we'll see a revenue neutral and cost recovery basis for the use of that facility. The other one that we have in there that I'd like to highlight is a special events contractor. So last year, we contracted out a individual to help us out with Canada Day and Yuki Days. It went really, really well. We usually try to hire on a summer person to help support that initiative, and it's becoming very, very difficult to find somebody that will work for a few months in support of our community events. So what we're suggesting this year is on a trial basis is that we look at a special events contractor. It'd be funded through RMI and the funds already allocated for Yuki Days. So there's no new tax dollars going towards it. And then this person would be kind of a part-time throughout the year contractor who would not only coordinate Yuki Days and Canada Day, but a number of other community events throughout the year. So they would be working with volunteers, recruiting the volunteers, coordinating, organizing, and creating new events for the community. So we think this is a really good way to increase our capacity with respect to Yuki Days and try to create a opportunity to augment our community events. And it gives us a lot more wiggle room to move with that position to help, because they can spend that time anywhere that is needed. So during Yuki Days, it'll be a lot busier. During different parts of the year, it'll be a little bit slower, but the end objective is that it would all balance out in a net benefit for the community. Yes. Well, it's, sorry, just as a point of clarity, it's $20,000 of additional funding for that position. So it currently resides at $40,000. I think this is where Director of Recreation is commenting. So we currently have it 20. The numbers in the adjustments are the differences, not the totals. Moving on to operations. So we have a little bit of cemetery funds in there. We only generate a small amount of revenue from for operations in cemetery. This year, you'll notice that parks is encapsulated into operations. This is part of what we're doing as an organization to amalgamate our public works and parks teams, and showing this as a cohesive unit that focuses on the municipality as a whole rather than two separate departments. So a few changes within that, not a lot under administration. Operations, you'll note, is their costing for operations is spread out over a lot of different areas, including sewer and water. So you'll note that park seems awfully high comparatively to the rest of the operations area. And that's because operations also includes, in a lot of the positions, their wages and benefits, supplies and materials are represented in the sewer and water budgets. So those are drawn out of it. So it can look off, but it is more representative of the total expenditures. So general operations going up slightly. We have increased operations training that we're focusing on, and this is to ensure that we're meeting our operations certification and training requirements for our utility operators, and making sure we're certified to use the backhoes and bobcats and all the other equipment that we have. We're increasing the request for funding for tool replacement. So a lot of our tools, along with the rest of our infrastructure, is aging out. We need to start investing more proactively in it. So this will help replace some of those aged tools and bring us up to speed. Cemetery supplies also has a pretty big jump, about $4,000 in that, and that is the liners and the cost for the burial supplies is it's almost doubled. So it's getting a lot more expensive to purchase those items. We will be looking at updating our cemetery bylaw to increase the fees accordingly, because what we try to do is a cost recovery on that. We typically don't try to make money off of anything, but we do want to make sure that we're covering off all of our operational supplies and material costs for providing those services. Let me just look at a couple more notes here. So council will note that roads and sidewalks have a slightly higher increase than the other areas. This is predominantly due to the cost of asphalt. It has gone up significantly. There's very limited access to those suppliers. So we're seeing a lot more costs associated with finishing and asphalt supplies. For parks in general, we're seeing increase of supplies, material costs, cemetery expenses, and salaries and benefits. Yeah, and that's the primary changes within operations and parks. So this next slide, and it's very busy, but it looks not too bad on the screen here. So this is a summary of all of the significant changes within the slides that have just been presented. So I want to take an opportunity here to discuss these with council. Is there any concerns, any additional information that council would like regarding any of these items? And I can provide a little bit more clarity. The one I might point out right away is Tourism Ucluelet, or the MRDT. So in years past, the district has collected these funds from the province. We were the designated recipient. In 2022, a decision was made to approve the designated recipient status going to Tourism Ucluelet, and that came into effect as of June of 2023. So what we're seeing is we normally collect $384,000 of MRDT funding, which would then pass through the municipality and go over to Tourism Ucluelet. We're no longer collecting that, so therefore you see a reduction in the transfers that or revenue coming into the municipality. So we're not collecting that anymore. The other note is for the OAP, so the online authorized provider agreements, which funds our affordable housing. So that now will go to and be collected and come in with the MRDT funds, which is received by our designated recipient, which is Tourism Ucluelet. And those funds will then be held in trust in a separate account with Tourism Ucluelet under an OAP. And then whenever affordable housing projects come into effect, then we send them an invoice and they send us the money for paying off of those approved affordable housing projects. So I'll take a little stop here. Is there any questions about any of the items or others within the significant changes for the operational budget?
I got a question. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Oh, yeah. Grants, just in the grants and aid with the 35. So I'm trying to remember, for some reason, I'm just drawing a blank here. I remember when I think it was Josh came with the Chamber of Commerce delegation. Is the default then, if he doesn't get the grant? I guess I have two questions. If the default is that it would be taxpayer funded if the Chamber of Commerce doesn't get the grant, and the second part to that is this. How often does grants and aid fund Chamber of Commerce? Like I was just looking back and I didn't see it in the last budget. Is this is like sort of a one-timer thing, or?
So great question. The $35,000, if it is included within the budget, this means that we will be collecting for it. Right, so it's, if it's an approved budget for 2024, that means it will go into the calculation for the amount of revenue that we need to collect. So yes, we would be collecting property taxes for this. If they don't receive the grant, and it's not removed from the budget, that means there'll be $35,000 of a grant and aid funding that the municipality would not have spent, and those monies would then be at the end of the year, if unused, would be transferred over to general reserves, which would then fund our capital projects or whatever other aspects of the budget that council deems appropriate. So that would be absorbed into the general budget. With respect to this request, so council has a grant and aid program, and there's two components to it. One is the cash funding. So that is considered in January and February of every year. So we had the applications go out on deadline of December 15th for individual organizations to request funding and put in applications for consideration to council, which will be coming in the next few weeks for council's consideration. That's about $21,000, and council allocates that based on the merit of the applications that you see. There is another about $40,000 that is in-kind contributions. So this offsets the cost of operations of lease agreements or use agreements for the UCC. So we have a number of organizations that have space within the within this building, primarily the daycare, and that $40,000 gets transferred as revenue for recreation, and it's an expense because we have to pay for that space. So there's an in-kind contribution. There is the cash contributions, which is coming in the near future to council for consideration or allocation. And then this request specific for the Chamber of Commerce is a one-time request that they made in November of 2023, and it is the direction from council was to bring this forward for consideration within the 2024 budget.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I couldn't remember if we were talking about a grant or if we had said the default it would be taxpayer. I just couldn't remember. But thank you.
Well, whether it's grant or default, if this money needs, it can be, and council can make a decision to allocate it in perpetuity to whatever council would like to allocate it towards. So it could be in perpetuity, but I would need to revise the budget to reflect an ongoing expense in the grants and aid, or allocate it as another support dedicated line item within the budget.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you.
Is there any other questions of council? Okay.
Could you break out the $120,000 for the addition of an executive assistant?
The base salary is about 82,000, and then benefits run around 27%, and that includes CPP, EI, municipal pension plan, general benefits.
Okay.
The next slide here this is to do with our operational projects. So these are the ones that we allocate, or that don't fit in the capital budget. So these are items that we do not amortize or have depreciated values against. So if you think about a truck, right? We purchase a vehicle, we need to depreciate the value of that truck within the budget over the course of its expected life cycle, which is 15 years or so out here. These items are paper-based, so they don't actually have a depreciated value. So they're encapsulated within the operational budget. What council is seeing here, and I apologize for a little bit of confusion here that it might seem, is that there's carry forward funds, so the CFW from 2023. So these are funds that we have already collected that are unspent, that will go to fund the projects that were approved in prior years. So the website rebuild, we have spent a few dollars on that, a couple of $1,000s already. I think it was $35,000 is what we budgeted for. We still have $33,075 left of that budget. That's moving into 2024. But we also noted that as we were going through the process, that this website rebuild is going to cost us a little bit more than 35. We're increasing that budget up to 50 to make sure that we're covering all of our costs. Now, we're not collecting $50,000 worth of new. We're only collecting the difference. So that would be the $15,000 that we're adding on as a new expense for that project. You'll note it's a little confusing for winter lights. It's at $77,000. That was fully funded through RMI, so the Resort Municipality Initiative. That one is there because, and it's very high, because the bills haven't come in for the lights that we purchased, so it's still showing that we haven't spent the funds there yet, but we have. So that'll come down significantly in the next couple of weeks once we have those bills and invoices that have been processed. So it's it shows a little off, but these are the numbers that we had at the time that these slides were developed, and I didn't want to guess at what those numbers might be at the for this presentation. So you'll note that like the pathway signage, there's we're carrying forward 50,000 and we need 50,000, so there's no change there. There is a couple of new items that we're asking council to consider. So the UCC exterior painting, so we want to continue on with maintaining the exterior of this building. So we're planning for 20,000 in 2025 and 2027. We have identified that the kitchen fire suppression unit within this building is not to code and needs to be updated to meet fire code. So we're estimating that's about $40,000 to bring it up to code, so we can operate it properly. The other two new ones is the Wild Pacific, or not new, is the Wild Pacific Trail Society annual project contribution. So we allocate $10,000 to the Wild Pacific Trail Society annually for projects. And then lighthouse furnishings. We're looking at about $50,000 to furnish the interior of the lighthouse. This is planned to be an expenditure through the Resort Municipality Initiative because it is a tourist based facility. So we should be able to fund that fully through RMI. Any questions? All right. So this gets us into an incredibly busy slide. So these are the cumulative numbers, and Councillor Anderson, you'll note there that it says Ministry of Housing grant. This is where that $160,000 is represented in 2 years, in 2024 and 2025. So we have allocated 80,000 in 24, 80,000 in 2025. That is the total grant funds that we're receiving. And that reduces the tax requisition that that council would need to contemplate moving into this budget cycle. So we could claim that all in 1 year, but that means that we then have to requisition the taxes for that position that is funded through grant in the next year. So this way it sort of balances out what those needs are over a 2-year period, rather than we get a good ride this year, but then we have to make it up next year. Overall, we're looking at total revenues with a tax requisition of $4,374,000. Of our total revenues would be $6.7 million. And then corresponding, as we must have a balanced budget, we're estimating our total expenditures at $6.7 million. This is up about $300,000, just shy of, actually it's about $230,000, $240,000 from 2023. There is a little bit of difference in here because we have to include the $360,000 that we're not collecting nor expending from Tourism Ucluelet. So it skews the numbers a little bit. Just so council is aware, it changes everything. And that couple of notes on our draft 5-year operations summary. So the 2023 represents the approved budget, not the actual. So we'll have that for the updated financial statements in February. The projection does not include dedicated transfers or reserves to capital project or capital project contributions. Capital contributions will be discussed later on in this presentation. The forecast does not include those capital requirements. So anything additional that we need to do for capital projects needs to be also considered, but it's not represented in that $4.37 million. There is also no transfers to reserves within the to the reserves within 2023 cannot be calculated until later on in January, as I stated earlier. And the 2024 property tax increase, right now without capital is looking at about that 5.7%. This is, I don't really like using percentages personally because it's not really representative of the impact to individual property owners. And we'll discuss this a little bit more at the end of the presentation.
That's just the municipal portion of the property taxes, not the overall tax bill that people receive, correct?
That is correct. So we requisition about, in 2023, we requisitioned $4 million worth of property taxes. In the ACRD, police, school, hospital, that is separate. And that's a separate calculation there. Yeah. All right. So, the remainder of the next three sections are still operational, except they are independently, they are somewhat independent from the general operational budget. So as I said at the beginning, Harbor Services, it is funded wholly through the revenues generated through the rental spaces and usage of the harbor. So our revenues are pretty flat. We're projecting, again, conservatively. So we're saying about $450,000 worth of revenue in our harbors at 52 Steps, Small Craft Harbor, and the Main Street Wharf. Our total operating costs are about $375,000. This is going up slightly, and our expenses go up because we have a percentage-based harbor master contract and harbor management contract. So as our revenues go up, so does the compensation for our harbor master and what they do. So it goes in tandem, and as our harbors are used to a higher level, we generate more revenue, but we also have slightly higher expenditures. But nothing really significant for changes within the harbor budget this year. I would also like to note that this does not include the capital costs. We're keeping those separate. This is just operational. Water. So this is a projection of our water rates. So $887,000 is what we're projecting for water usage. Just shy of $300,000 in flat rates. Parcel taxes pretty flat at $133,000, and meter usage is projected at just shy of $412,000. And we have increased connection fees, so we're doing a better job of actually levying out the fees, and we have a lot more connections coming. So we're seeing an increase in connection fees. We haven't increased those rates in quite some time. So we're doing okay for the revenue side. We are projecting a slight deficit within water, which we're going to have to address through an adjustment of our water fees and charges. We have a slight, marginal increase in administration. Our connection fees are going up because we're having more work, and the cost of doing those connections is going up significantly. And then water treatment is going up slightly, and distribution is going up slightly. But what we're seeing is, and this is, I should clarify, this is just to operate the system. So this isn't to do major capital repairs. So this is ongoing operation and maintenance, supplies and materials, oversight, testing. That's what goes into the operational side of it. The challenge that we have here is that our fees cover off our operational side of our water services, but they do not incorporate anything for our capital investment into our system, right? And this is a significant problem for the municipality moving forward that needs to be considered. We need to start addressing some of our aging infrastructure. Council's been made aware of this a number of times, but we're not collecting enough in our water services to fund future capital needs for our water system. So this is going to be a problem moving forward if it's not corrected.
Will any of that be addressed by the DCC update?
DCCs fund growth, right? So anything existing that needs servicing, replacement. An example would be some of our water towers, right? Our water towers are aging about 60, 70 years now. They're going to need to be replaced in another 10, 15 years, maybe 20 years. Because so that replacement of the water tower, if it was for the same exact volume, would not be covered off by a DCC. Now, if we took that water tower and doubled its capacity, then half of it could be funded through development cost charges. So DCCs only fund the growth portion of upgrading infrastructure.
Would it apply to upgrading infrastructure for its whole route? Let's say a sewer line all the way to the treatment plant, per se, it's not just within that one development to get us to the trunk line.
In theory, yes, but only the portion of the upgrade that is increasing the capacity for the new development. So a way to think about this is Madison Road, new infrastructure was put in to develop a force main related to Lot 16. Now, we wanted to upsize that by 100 millimeters, I believe, something like that. So the municipality paid for an additional amount. So the development paid for putting in the line that would service their needs, right? Then we said, no, we need this upsized. That portion was funded through DCCs because it'll increase our capacity to accommodate future growth. So only a portion of upsizing so if we had a 150 mil line and we needed another 50 millimeter capacity in that line, DCCs would pay for the 50 millimeters, not the 150.
Go ahead.
You're up.
What's do you know offhand like what the proportion is of flat rate water users versus the metered users?
I do not. I could get that information for council though.
And metered is actually being they're not. It looks like it's obviously different. So I thought that the metered ones weren't actually being like charged by the amount that they were using. I thought they were still doing flat rate, but I guess that is in effect.
Yeah, so we that's a good question. So when meters were introduced to the municipality, it was somewhat optional. So some residents elected and went through to put in the meters, and then any new development, new house that was required to have a meter. So we have a lot of homes within the municipality that are unmetered, and we charge based on a flat rate. And then any new dwellings, new businesses, any large businesses, say like the fish plant, they're metered, right? So they get we mandate that they had to have a meter, so they put one in. So we have this hybrid system of metered and unmetered or flat rate charges.
Okay, thanks.
So our sanitary system, similar condition as our water. So one thing to note is our sanitary system rates are directly linked to our water rates. So we currently charge our sanitary rates are 75% of the water rates for any metered charge. So the reason that that's done is there's an assumption that in Ucluelet that 75% of the water being utilized in a dwelling or business enters into the sanitary system. And the other 25% does not enter the sanitary system. So it goes to sprinkling lawns or watering gardens and that. That might be a number that council wants to consider adjusting because we get a lot of rain. We don't see a lot of lawn watering, so that might be somewhat low for the water that's actually entering our sanitary system, and it would be one way to more reflect the volume of water that's coming in or entering our sanitary system is by adjusting that rate. Not a tremendous amount of adjustments that we're anticipating. Our revenues are quite flat. Again, they are covering off the base operational requirements for our sanitary system, but they are not funding any capital. So there's no additional revenues being generated from our sanitary servicing fees and water fees to actually fund our capital requirements associated with these systems. And unfortunately, these systems are our most expensive systems to maintain, and they're all aging out. They're all around that 70-year mark for a large portion of our systems. Yeah, I don't think I have any other comments on this slide unless council has any questions about our sanitary system.
I've got a little one. So the 75% rate that's in the sanitary bylaw, and when was that last looked at? Is this one of those super outdated? Yeah, like
Yes, I think it's
a long
around
time ago when dinosaurs still roamed the
2011.
earth.
We, some of our bylaws go back to 1997,
Yeah.
and there are amendments to those bylaws, so they haven't sat there completely unlooked at. But I do know that our water rates, so our sanitary parcel tax, for example, it's a flat $85, $84. $84. I think it's $84 and $80 respectively for water and sanitary. That's flat for 5 years. So there's no movement in this. Although our expenditures are going up every single year, it is just flat. And that's the same with our sanitary and our rates, our meter charges. They're flat, so they don't change. So that is normal for most communities. They just every 5 years they go through and they update it. But I'm an advocate of building in an inflator on an annual basis, so you don't get these massive increases on that people do see. So you build in a 2 or 3% annual increase to your water rates or your sanitary rates, and it would just increase as the cost of maintenance and operation goes up. And residents wouldn't see this huge adjustment every once in a while when it comes forward saying, hey, we've got a problem, we need to increase our rates. So it's something that I'll be talking about a little bit later on in this presentation as well.
So we don't actually know how much water we're sending out, and we don't know how much black water is coming back. So like the actual systems aren't metered, like at the source and at the line.
Yes, that's not quite correct. So yes, we do know the volumes, the water usage. We know how much water is being pumped out. I would have to ask my operations director, who is unfortunately dealing with a home illness right now. So I don't have that at my fingertips, but we do have that information of how much water we are pumping out of our wells and into our system. We also know how much volume of black water is being pumped from our lift station up into our sanitary treatment facilities. They are not representative of each other because we have a lot of infiltration into our sanitary system. So whenever it rains, we see a massive spike in our pumping needs for that system. So we have what we suspect, and pretty good likelihood, is that we have stormwater that is connected into our Blackwater system, our sanitary system, and that is affecting how much volume we need to pump, and therefore affecting the size and impacts on our sanitary lift stations.
I saw it. Sorry, I just wanted to jump. I don't want to go on a super tangent here, but I saw that we do have a budget for more cameras to figure. I would assume to some degree figure this out. Do you think that? I guess this is more of a question for James later on, but do you think this is something that we can eventually like figure out in the next couple of years, where if we do have stormwater coming in that's affecting our capacity for the lift stations right now?
Absolutely. The way you would do it is you would camera the system, take a look at where those connections are. Each house should have one connection. If there's multiple connections going into it, that, a storm line has actually been connected to the sanitary line. And then we would request the homeowner or business or whatever the case may be to disconnect the storm system or their storm water from their roof or wherever it's coming from our sanitary system. So yes, you can do it. It is a time-consuming, long process, and I should say I shouldn't pick on residents' houses completely, because I would suspect that our own storm system is connected to our sanitary system in some cases as well. So we could be funneling water from roads into our sanitary system just as likely as it could be coming from a rooftop. So there is that as well. So each time we identify one would reduce the volume going into our sanitary systems. With water, it's a little bit more complex. There's no such thing as a water system that doesn't leak. There's always leaks around, so you're always going to have a level of water that is being pumped from wells that is pumped into the ground, because they're very, very difficult to find. So by cameraing, doing leak detection, you can reduce the amount of water loss in a system and reduce your demand on your well and water supplies. But I don't think there is a community out there that has ever reached anywhere near zero. I think, 20, 30% would be a really, really optimistic aim.
Okay, good to know.
Wonderful. Any other additional questions? All right. So at this point, that is the operational budget in summary. I'm just checking in with council if you wanted to take a break, or do you want me to keep on at her? All right.
I think we're okay.
Excellent. So capital works. So this is all of our capital infrastructure: roads, sewer, water, parks, playgrounds, facilities, vehicles, water towers, sanitary systems. This is all of the stuff that provide services in concrete manners to the community: parks and trails and sports fields, playgrounds, etc. So our capital budget, this provides a preliminary projection of the 5-year capital requirements as of December of 2024. The approved and funded projects are shown in blue on these slides. So those are all the ones that are already in the works. They're funded through grants, reserves, various funding avenues. So those are already fully funded projects. You'll notice on the slides forthcoming, the fund indicates where the municipality should be funding the project from. You'll see here I provided a legend of all the different sources and avenues of funding of funds that we work with. Now, if council recalls, we just adopted a new reserves bylaw. That bylaw replaced a lot of old reserves. And in 2023, our plan was to make that transition from the old reserve accounts to fund the new reserve accounts. with the departure of our director of finance in May of last year, that work didn't occur. So we're still utilizing the old reserve funds. So it's the same money, it's just a different allocation. And what I wanted to do is show council where the funds should be coming from. Right, we will get to in 2024 to undertake the transfer of the reserves from the general pot over to the various reserves where they belong in 2024. So there's quite a few different allocations of funding or sources of funding. The new reserves account, so I already talked about that. So projects are derived from directives from council, all of our master plans. So this is our sanitary, water, storm, parks and recreation master plans, our OCP, infrastructure requirements, and development. So all of those aspects come into play when considering our 5-year capital plan. The projects will move a little bit within the capital plan based on approved funding, new grant opportunities, and emergency operational requirements. So when we talk about emergency operational requirements, this is an unplanned failure of a system that we need to make an emergency repair from. This is what we want to try to avoid because emergency repairs are very costly compared to planned repairs to systems. Projects can be advanced through long and short-term borrowing as well, so it doesn't all have to, it'll all come from tax dollars eventually, but depending on how we want to fund this, we can do long and short-term borrowing, we can do lease agreements for vehicles, so there's a number of avenues that we can help offset the immediate tax implication rather than requisitioning it just purely from tax dollars. But all capital projects are funded eventually through tax requisitions and then offset from grant funding and fees and charges. So our fleet, we have a couple of vehicles that need to be replaced. We'll get those on the next slide. So the average age of our municipal fleet is about 12 years. With the conditions that we have with salt on the roads, we usually get about 15 years out of them. And we have replaced a number of our vehicles, 15 to 20 year old vehicles in recently, but we still have a couple that are very old, including a 26-year-old backhoe, which is our primary piece of equipment to do real work. So that is the $250,000 1998 Cat backhoe. That one is overdue. Our operational expense to maintain this machine is excessive. And every time that we need to get it fixed, it has to be trucked down to Port Alberni, which takes 2 people out for an entire day to drive it there, and then 2 people to go and pick it up because, you know, they have to deliver the equipment, drop it off, and then come back. So it's very costly for us to maintain this very old piece of equipment. You also see the 2008 GMC Sierra. That one is our oldest piece of equipment. I'm going to flip to the next slide here. So picture's worth 1,000 words. That rusty undercarriage with I'm not exactly sure what that is, but it's no longer attached. That's the undercarriage of the Sierra. It's rusted out. It's no longer roadworthy or safe, so we've had to take that one off the road. It looks pretty good in the picture beside it, but the undercarriage is just, the salt just eats it alive. So we're looking at replacing that with a 2008, or replace the 2008 3/4 ton with a new truck of equivalent size. We're estimating between $80,000 and $100,000. We're also looking at adding in a 3-ton dump truck. This is equivalent of like a Ford F450. and it's represented in the picture at the bottom there with the plow blade on it that we received last year, and I'm not sure if we're hopeful that we might be able to use it this year or not. But we're all set for plowing snow this year, which is really nice. But having only one dump truck capable vehicle is very challenging because we have a lot of works that are going on. So parks and operations, to do anything, it's difficult to service on one vehicle that has dumping capacity. And then on the bottom right-hand corner is our 1998 backhoe. We estimate that at a $200,000 to $250,000 expenditure nowadays. That's just the cost of these pieces of equipment. It is the workhorse of the municipality. It is what we utilize for excavating water and sanitary lines and doing the lion's share of the work. So this piece of equipment is well overdue in its replacement. I think last year we spent upwards of $25,000 in maintenance costs on it. So that adds up significantly from year to year, and it's only getting worse. Eventually, it's not going to be repairable anymore. So going back to our fleet slide, we're requesting council to give consideration to an allocation of $350,000 towards fleet this year. Next year in 2025, we had the dump truck replacement, trying to spread that load over 2 years, and then we have a ATV that we use for parks and other maintenance objectives. It's just aging out, it's getting old, and needs to be replaced, and that one's a smaller expenditure, about $30,000. Then our next vehicles that are up for replacement are the Ford Ranger and the GMC. Now, again, they're in 2008. We're projecting them out in 2028, but they could be moved forward depending on their condition. We're trying to get the most life out of them, but if they start requiring increased repairs, then we might request council to reconsider that in future budgets to bring them forward.
That the outside of that Sierra looks pretty good. I'm wondering if we could go ahead with the undercoating or the underspray next year when we get the new one.
Yeah, we'll ensure that we get the full spray underneath, but it's still the salt on the roads from the ocean. It just eats vehicles. So, yeah, we try to maintain them as best we can, but salt unfortunately ravages our equipment quite significantly.
Yeah, I know like in Squamish, there's a place that does it because they have all the road salting there because of the snow, and they have to do all their vehicles constantly because they have to drill them out and put all the rust proofing on the inside and all the panels because they rust out so quickly. But
Yep.
yeah.
I know Councillor Mafty had mentioned or inquired about leasing vehicles, and rather than running these things into the ground over 12 years, if it might make more sense to lease these vehicles over a term where they don't deteriorate to the point and return them, and just keep them as a line item each year, so that we're not faced with these big bursts of funding requirements every 5 or 10 years.
Absolutely, that is something that we will look at, and it's a good point, and we have talked about it briefly. The lease rates right now are quite high, so we need to take a look at the cost benefits of doing that. There's definitely benefits to leasing vehicles, but it does cost a little bit more, but then again, on the maintenance and the turnover of those vehicles can have also cost savings as well. So if this is approved, what we will be doing is looking at how do we want to replace these vehicles, whether it's a lease or or just a buyout outright.
I mean, potentially the other thing we could look at is more of a steady replacement every 4 years, to make sure that we can actually sell them and continually use vehicles that need no maintenance for us and pass them along.
Absolutely. Yes. I'd be happy to investigate that. I know our works crew and everybody would be thrilled about taking that type of stance. It does.
Well, it's something we can budget for on an annual basis. Say every 4 years we're going to replace this truck, and we're never staring at a $350,000 bill. We're looking at $50,000 every year over that term. So it's less volatile for us.
100%. Yes. Yeah. The one note is that you'd still probably see the backhoe, right? Like those pieces of equipment you don't typically lease, right? But for all of our trucks, all the pickup trucks and that, absolutely, you can get those on a lease or a rotating basis through, and just keep them new and keep our operational and maintenance costs down to a minimum. What we haven't done in the municipality at this point in time is charge ourselves for the usage of the vehicles within our operating budget. And it's one of the things that we'll be working towards, is including a line item within all of our operations cost centers. So whether it's parks, sewer, water, building inspection, planning, administration, every time you use a vehicle, you charge out a mileage charge for the use of that vehicle, and that is a dedicated expense for the replacement of that vehicle over time. So you're charging yourself for the use of the vehicle, and that way, as Councillor you mentioned, you don't get these big bursts of capital investment into fleet replacement. The money's already there.
Before we get into buildings, could I make a motion to have a 5-minute break?
I'll second that.
All in favor? Carried. Thank you.
Set a timer for 5 minutes.
All right, we'll resume this meeting at 5:32. Mr. Lawrence.
All right, thank you. So the next slide deals with our municipal buildings. As I stated previously, the items in blue are fully funded through various means. So as you'll see for the Amphitrite, there's a combination of grant, resort municipality initiative funding, and general revenue, general reserves that fund it. Our fleet storage shed, which will help reduce the impacts of weather on our fleet. It's halfway through, so we've ordered it. We've put the deposit on the new shed building, and it should be arriving in the next couple of months. But we have $55,000 worth of additional works to be completed. The Leach building, we're starting to identify more dedicated funding to our municipal buildings, which hasn't been done in the past. So council will see in 26 we have a quite a significant chunk of money dedicated to the municipal hall building, and that is for the replacement of the siding, the cover for the front entrance there, which is not good. It's showing its age, and that's being conservative. And also you see some replacement equipment for the UCC. So that's interior furnishings like tables and chairs for the main hall. Our that should say refinishing. So every once in a while we have to refinish the floor of the UCC to maintain that in good order. That's planned for 2025. We also have previously approved and projects that are being carried forward, so they're not in progress yet, but they are on the books. So that is a generator for this building so that it can operate when the power's out. An additional storage facility on the side of the building there because there's nowhere to store things, or never enough space to store things. Our AV expenditures, so this has been ongoing. We're just waiting for parts. So it's fully funded. It's funded actually through COVID funds that we received back in 2021 and 2022. And this is the last little remaining piece of that. We have a heat pump replacement. That's just part of the cycling of aging infrastructure. So that's when we're planning on that one. If that might be pushed out a little bit depending on the condition of it. So we'll assess, but it'll move a little bit depending on need. The rec hall replacement plan. So this is approved by council. So we have $75,000 funded through the Barclay Community Forest Fund reserves. And that is for the pre-planning for future replacement of the rec hall, which council is aware it's 100-year or approaching 100-year-old building. It does not have a foundation. It was a temporary building way back in the day, and it's time to replace that well-loved facility. You will see at the very bottom there an ATCO trailer. So right now we have the park staff working out of a 10x10 trailer that is separate from the rest of the operations team. The floor is not in great shape. So what we want to do is replace that ATCO trailer, stick the existing trailers together to make one space so that our entire operations team can work cohesively together in one space, which will be a lot more effective for future operations. The UAC replacement, so that is beside the fire hall. We wanted to get that on the books. It needs to be replaced as well. It's a very, very old building. Again, this is something to consider. We put it at the far end of the operational 5-year plan just to get it in front of council so you're aware of it. So that can adjust as needed. We always assume that actually, that shouldn't be the UAC. That should be the rec hall replacement. My apologies. This could be funded through grants, Barclay Community Forest, and Recreation Reserves. That's typically where we would look at funding at. So my apologies, that's not the UAC, that's the UCC. The rec hall. My apologies. So, parks operation building, as I noted previously. So we're looking at about $75,000, and this would replace the 9.5 by 24-foot trailer, which fits 2 to 3 people, and we have 6 parks crew in there right now. Not quite conducive to appropriate use. So getting a full-size unit, it has been costed out. These the 75,000 is fairly accurate as to a general quote from Atco and Britco, and they're available on the island. So this is something that we could reasonably achieve and make that workspace for our operations department much more effective. So we're recommending council give good consideration to this request. Amphitrite House, as noted before, this is a fully funded project. So it's just shy of $1.7 million. It is $1 million of ICIP grant funding, RMI, and then Tourism Vancouver Island is providing $100,000 as well. So there's no direct tax dollars going into this project. It's fully grant funded. The work on that one is going really well, looking pretty good. So we should see that project completed in the next 6 months, I would say. Our harbor. So we have a little bit of work that we're suggesting that we could do from, and this is a float plane upgrade at Whiskey Dock. So Whiskey Dock is out front of the Municipal Hall. We have a new request possibly for additional harbor flights into Ucluelet. That is a possibility right now, nothing for certain, but it's looking optimistic. But some upgrades to that dock need to be done to accommodate float planes safely, so that we can use that dock more effectively. So it's about $30,000 to modify the docks. Within this is also the Inner Harbor Walkway. So this one, I'm going to flip to the next slide here. So this is a pathway that would go around the small craft harbor and connect out to the existing, although currently closed for several years, walkway that goes out to the point by water's edge. So this is, again, this is fully funded through the Resort Municipality Initiative, and then we would be suggesting that we use harbor reserves to fund it. It's part of the harbor, so we can use some of those reserve funds to actually fund this one, so it's not tax dollars that would be going into it. So again, no tax implications for residents and businesses. So we're suggesting that we fund that project through those two means.
Could I just ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I know it's sort of out there, but the idea of doing the float plane upgrade, would the theory be that, you know, that's a space that would potentially get leased, so we might actually have some cost recovery on some of that?
Absolutely. So all of our dock spaces are covered off by our harbor rates. So if a commercial entity is utilizing those space, they would have to pay for that under the terms of the existing harbor charges bylaw. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head. I'm not sure if Abby would. Not off the top of her head either, but we could get those for council. But yes, it would be cost recovery eventually.
I just didn't recall one in there for float planes versus, so I didn't know if there was a difference. Do we charge them more because they've got wings? I don't know.
Is it anticipated that? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you start. Go ahead.
Sorry, through the mayor, there is a moorage fee. Off the top of my head, I'm sorry, I don't know if there's a difference between float planes and boats. I don't believe there is, but there is a moorage fee similar to what we do. We've got Louis and Wild. Well, I am trying to remember what the name of his company is. Wild. That's what it
Is your mic on, Abby?
is. It on?
Yep.
That's much better.
Sorry, was in it. Sorry.
Projecting, darling.
Merge rate, basically similar to what we do with the boats, but as Dwayne had mentioned, it is our property
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the Smallcraft Harbor property.
Are we anticipating increased float plane traffic? Like, is that the goal?
So currently there is a private company that is engaging with the municipality that they would like to bring additional float plane services directly into Ucluelet. Where it's still in the preliminary stages, so I'm a little hesitant to say too much at this point in time. But there's an existing company that services Tofino. They're looking at expanding their services and adding a stop into Ucluelet, so we could fly potentially out of Ucluelet directly to Vancouver and Nanaimo, I think. I'm not sure where just Vancouver.
Will there be any kind of environmental impact assessment or a noise assessment? Because they're quite obnoxious, to be honest. And the concern would be the noise pollution from that and what it would do to our downtown.
So any new service like this would need to be considered by council. So as soon as we actually have an application from the entity or the business that wants to provide it, it would be coming to council. And at that point in time, any additional considerations with respect to the proposal could be contemplated. Noise impacts, wake, any other environmental impacts as well.
Okay.
And I see that the boat launch extension has been pushed into 2025. That's been talked about for quite a number of years. Is there any way of starting it in 2024? That's to make the boat launch
Yes.
more accessible at various tides, right?
That's right. Yeah, it has a unfortunate drop at the end when it gets to low tide. So yes, we could bring that back into 2024. What we're trying to do is just sort of balance out those costs. The only caveat that I would put in there is depending on how the reserves look would impact whether or not that $80,000 could be absorbed into 2024 or not. I suspect that it probably could. With no detrimental impact to the walkway project or the float plane upgrades if they are required.
That would be great to look into that. Yeah.
Okay, so this leads us into parks and trails. So what we have on the books is continued work in Village Green out in 2027. We have two washroom projects, that are fully funded through grants. So Destination Development Fund is providing funding for us for two flush toilets in the park areas, a high volume pit toilets for the ones that don't have access or readily accessible access to our sanitary systems. The Wild Pacific Trail bridge and walkway replacement, we have $70,000 allocated towards that. This is to replace some of the aging walkways and wood structures that are associated with the Wild Pacific Trail. We have a variety of other trail projects that are on the books. Coast Guard Road to relocating the trespass section. So that's a section that is right at Coast Guard Road and Peninsula Road. There's a piece of property that we slip over into private lands. So we either need to get agreement for access to those lands or we need to move the trail. But there's a section there that's been closed for a few years because of that trespass. Pass Melfort Trail. So if council recalls, there was an approval for a section that would connect along the Pass of Melfort there. So we have funds available for making that connection properly. I'm not going to go through every project unless council has specifically questions for them, but in 2024, we also have the Village Green Playground. We expect that work to start in February, so we should see construction team showing up within the next 4 to 6 weeks with our new playground. So that'll be up and running, probably take about 6 weeks to 8 weeks to install that, as what we anticipate. And then there's some last pieces of the Alder Park kayak launch. So the launch is actually constructed. This is just the finishings and prettying it up. So there's just a slight amount of work that is being carried forward to finish that project off.
Will there be some signage made available?
Yes.
Great, thank you.
And we'll also do an announcement, I think probably in the spring, to actually tell people that there's a new kayak launch that they can access. So we haven't made it really public yet as the availability of that location. Although we do know kayakers have found it.
That's the 4 years out for the skate park expansion. That's that whole second phase, I guess, and it's coming from, what is it, recreation reserves, general and donation. Is the donation, is that the money that was raised by the group? in
Yes,
charge
that
of
would
skate park?
be donations raised by the skate park group advocates. We put it in the budget in 2028 as a placeholder because we do have a group that is actively pursuing this. It's whether or not it gets continued to push out. We think the $400,000 is a little bit conservative on funds, but this is what they're looking at. There's nothing been presented to council to say, yes, this is a go, and council hasn't committed any reserve funding to this project at this point in time. So those three areas, grants, donations, and recreation reserves, are all theoretical contributions at this point in time.
Okay, and anything going with those, did it go anywhere with the lighting that we were talking about doing in the skate park there? I remember that it was a little, the price had gone up for those lights, but I'm just wondering if we got anywhere with getting the lights set up there.
The lighting was, as per the direction of council, it was removed from the capital project sheet, so it's not in there. We're not anticipating moving that forward. Many of the skateboard users that we talked to didn't quite understand why they wanted the lights in the first place. They would rather an extension to the facility than lighting, because a lot of the usage time during the winter when it's dark out, it's wet and it's not really usable. But at this point in time, as I'm aware, there wasn't a huge demand from users to actually light the skateboard park. I know there's obviously some individuals that would like to see that. But at this point in time, we don't have that in the budget. We can add it back in if it's a priority of council.
At the time that we were discussing that, I remember there's $80,000 allocated to it, and I made it pretty clear that I wanted to see that stay in reserves for the skate park, and I don't know where that went. And is there that $80,000 anywhere for pre-planning or anything like that? Because I'm looking at 2025 here, and we only have $40,000. Is there any way we can pull some of that forward and use that $80,000 for some pre-planning?
Absolutely, we can add it back into the budget. So the recreation reserves, I believe they're at about $60,000 right now. So recreation reserves are quite low, unless our director of Parks and Recreation has more up-to-date details on the reserves.
No, sorry, through the mayor, I don't have more up-to-date details. I just was, if I may ask for clarification from Councillor Kennington, are you meaning for planning for the skate park extension?
Oh.
That's what I thought. Correct. For planning purposes. Agreed. Thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
Sorry, I was thinking about specifically skateboard lighting.
When we spoke about the lighting, we kind of said, okay, well, maybe it doesn't make sense, but also that money should stay allocated to the skate park.
Right.
And now I see an opportunity here in 2025 to potentially use that $80,000 to do some pre-planning for a shovel-ready project, so that, you know.
Oh, I can't hear you.
For 2028, that maybe something can happen through grants and through some funding.
Absolutely. If it's a priority for council to add that in to undertake that work, as it was my understanding originally, and but this can change obviously, is that this was an initiative that was being undertaken by the skate park group, and there hadn't actually made a request for funding at this point in time to undertake any pre-planning work. So, but that does not preclude council from allocating funds to the pre-planning for it, so that they have something that they could aim towards, which would definitely make it like a shovel-ready project. It could also help them with securing grants in the future. So there's a lot of benefits to doing that pre-planning work in advance to help further this on if it's a priority for council.
I just see an opportunity in 2025, like, and nowhere else in this spreadsheet.
Just so you know, Ian, people can't hear you.
Oh, I had
I
my
got you
mic
now.
off it.
There you go.
I hear you now.
Sorry,
hear
I was
you now.
talking about you, Sean. I didn't want you to hear it.
Yes, I know what was going on. Yeah, for some reason, as far as I remember it, the lights they came in being a little bit expensive, and then I thought we were going to take that money and put that back into general, and then keep our eye open for something down the road. But if we're not, if the general consensus is, and maybe this is something we should reach out to that group, say Ollie and Leon and the fellas, and ask them if, in lieu of these lights, like we just, go ahead with the pre-planning on the expansion, which is probably what they would want. But again, we should probably check with them and see. But yeah, it's a great resource that we have in the town here, and I know more and more people are coming to use our skate park. So that's an exciting recreation amenity for sure.
The one benefit of facilities such as the skateboard park is that it's once it's constructed, there's not a high level expense to a municipality, and there's high value for recreation, unprogrammed activities that people can use when and as they wish. So that is in line with recreation goals and objectives that you're seeing throughout the province in Canada, is increased access to areas of recreation where individuals can utilize it when they want to, rather than sort of like brick and mortar buildings where you have to have somebody there to provide supervision to. So we can definitely add that in. I'll make a note within the budget and add it into the 5-year financial plan if that's what council would like.
Personally, I would like. I'll leave it to other people to chime in if they feel that's appropriate.
I think it's good to have something shelf ready for when grants do come available.
Oh, for sure.
Sounds great. Sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
I'll ensure to review this with our Director of Recreation and come up with a figure that would be appropriate for the pre-work design work that would represent. I don't want to allocate an amount that will not yield a design-ready project that can't be funded. So we'll come back to council in either January or February as needed and include that number in there.
Excellent.
Nice.
Thank you.
Any additional questions with respect to parks? Yes.
I'm just looking for a bit of clarification on the Edna Bachelor Park Playground one in 2026 for 140,000. I'm like, that there was a lot of work done in there. I'm like, are we replacing the equipment that's coming to end of life?
So yes, the playground there is again, it's one of our very old playgrounds. It's kind of duct taped together at this point in time. It needs to be replaced. So we've done a lot of work around the surfacing and the ground surrounding the playground. We've done that all internally using internal resources. But the replacement of a playground, it's just a straight cost to the municipality. We can go after a grant for that. Sometimes there is grant funding available for parks and playgrounds and such, so we will be looking at that as an opportunity. But we do need it in on the budget saying this thing needs to be replaced. It's a very popular area as well. It would get
I
high
see it
use.
used
Yeah.
every single day.
Yeah.
So
Can I ask what the DDF stands for again? In the washroom project?
Destination Development Fund.
Okay.
So that's part of Tourism Vancouver Island or not Tourism Vancouver Island, it's part of Destination BC.
Destination Development Fund. Thank you.
This is a couple of the slides just providing a little overview and pictures of what we're talking about. So depicted is the playground that's being installed starting in February that people will see and be able to use in Village Green. Also a couple samples of the types of washroom facilities. Currently we're looking at Hitinkus and Browns Beach as viable areas for plumbed toilet facilities that will allow us to reduce the number of portable toilets that we're currently renting and servicing through a contractor. And then also we're looking at hopefully 2 deep well pit toilets, one for the Whale parking lot and another one for Ancient Cedars Loop. And that will help significantly reduce the cost of pumping that we need to do. So those usually last anywhere from a month to 3 months, instead of having those small portable toilets pumped out every 3 days. On to affordable housing. So a couple of things here. So we have 1300 Peninsula Road. That is the supportive housing project that we're still waiting for confirmation if we are receiving funding for that project. Our allocation is $175,000. The rest would be, or the remainder of what we are allocating is about $175,000. The remainder would be coming from CMHC and BC Housing if we're successful with a grant. Lot 13, so that one is moving forward slowly, but it is moving forward. Pre-sales are done. Work is being done by the developer. So we anticipate that that will come to fruition in 2025 if all goes well for his build. Within this, there's a capacity building that's allocated in there of $75,000 in 2024 and 2025, and this is to help fund the new positions that council approved earlier or in December for the planning position and the executive assistant position, because this helps us deal with all of the legal and legislative and bylaw requirements. So we think we can fund this a little bit through capacity building through the Affordable Housing Fund. Now, the one that is a question for council and a discussion point. So council in December requested that we include and consider investigating the water tower lot as a feasibility study. We engaged with MCOA, and they gave us a price of approximately $200,000 to figure out how to utilize and what would it take to utilize this this site and service it. This may or may not be eligible for funding through affordable housing. If the site is designated for affordable housing, then we could fund it through the affordable housing. If it turns out that it is not affordable, then it comes out of your general reserves. So, you know, staff have looked at this lot many times, very high level, but the things that we look at when we're considering that property is that it's a hill. There's a water tower on top of it. It has significant challenges with water and sewer providing access. There's a portion of land that would need to be purchased to provide a road access to that site, and then road construction. And all of those expenditures would need to be a part of the consideration of how affordable this lot may or may not be. And staff are fairly confident in our guesswork that this is not an affordable site. This is going to be an expensive site to service. We can definitely do the investigation work, and this money, although might and is unlikely to be supported through affordable housing, would add substantial value to that lot. It would give us all the information that we would need to consider how that lot could be developed, subdivided off, sold, either as a whole, or the municipality subdivides it and sells it off individual parcels and then uses that funds to fund something else. There's a lot of competition within this budget for resources, so whether or not council wants to consider this in 2024 or a future year, I'd love to have that discussion with council at this point in time.
I agree with everything you just said. I don't think anybody's under any illusion that this is an affordable lot, but can we leverage it for affordable housing? So, selling it off to a deep-pocketed developer what it would take to build something there that would pencil out so that we have the funds. So, do we need to go out and do that feasibility study? I think we all know that really, no, we don't. But a market assessment is probably adequate to tell us what the value of that land is, and if we can come to some agreement of how those funds would be spent should we dispose of that lot. Could be a win. A land swap. I don't know who's got land that swap it with it, but there's not much land left. But
I see Bruce Gregg, Director of Planning, waving, so I think he has some comments.
okay.
I was just going to add, it might help just expand a bit what the scope was, where the estimate of the 200,000, 150 to 200,000, probably towards the 200,000 was what the McCullough was with some initial discussions about scope, and because they've done these sorts of things, it would definitely be put out to an RFP, but it was really looking at what value would the municipality add, or in terms of decision making, and then also be able to get, if it was a decision of, well, maybe it's parts or all of it are surplus, then what price do you put on it? It's really starting to answer the unknowns. So this would be looking at geotechnical, archaeological, biological, have a civil engineer do the initial, okay, how would you put in a road and servicing, and then get a cost estimate of that, and also involve a land economist to talk about really what's the highest best use and what are the options and opportunity costs and that sort of thing. It's a large site. It has some challenges in terms of getting access, and then once you're up there, you're at the height of the water tower. So again, the engineering of, well, how would you pressurize water if you're putting buildings up there too, and what would all that look like, and whether there ended up being an option where, okay, some land could be used and is feasible for affordable housing, and there's some market development paying that off. That really would be the exercise. And I mean, I think that then starts to answer, okay, well, what's the best zoning to place there, and if it's being developed by the district or made available for affordable housing or sold for the highest price to use the money for other community purposes. This is really to give an educated picture of those options. And so it's a fair bit of work to go into that, and because it's a site that has some challenges. It also I haven't been on top of the water tower myself, but I understand that buildings up there, there may be some marketable sites there that would have, certainly on the upper floors, views of Japan. So it's be sunset over the water and over Big Beach. So add all that up, we could, guess, but that's really sort of our best information on what the price tag of getting the real details to make some decisions with. So whether that's, this year or next year or someday, that's probably something to plan for, but really it's, where does that fit within the priorities? We just wanted to bring some information to sort of.
Yeah, I guess if
push
we
that out.
find out that nothing's feasible up there, it's a beautiful park, right? But at least we know.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it seems like it's better to know than to be in this state of like, could we or could we not do X, Y, or Z up there? It's problematic to not know. And I'd rather make the best use of, it is kind of the one property we have.
That's really unfortunate.
It is very unfortunate to be so land poor, but if we can make use of it in a way that benefits the town in the best possible way, I think it's worth knowing.
Is there any planning in place to look at the water tower and its expansion as our water needs grow? Is there any reason to think that we should hang on to a good sized chunk of that for future water needs, or is it all fine the way it is and that with that footprint
So-
of the existing water tower?
Our current master plan, if memory serves, is where I'd yield to my director of operations. But our current plan is to expand the water storage capacity out on the highway, not in this location. We're nearing at our water demand needs for fire protection and fire flows and water usage. So this is something that we need to consider in the near term. If the new developments are come online, if they're approved, if there's more development coming, and we just had that presentation in December from High Focus Island, and tomorrow night we have another presentation from Districts Group for development. With those developments, increased water capacity will need to be undertaken. So at this point in time, we were looking out at the highway as the preferred location because it's higher ground. Future, I don't believe it's indicated for expansion at this location, but it could be for water balancing and storage.
But replacement, right? Didn't you mention replacement at one point in this? Oh, looks like we have a-
We're pinch hitting here for the director of operations. The water master plan, I think, always anticipates a water tower remaining in that location. Whether it needs to grow in the future, I think we have. I think it's intended to be replaced and maintained there as part of the overall system. I think it's important to have it as part of the piece. I think like the OCP, that was part of what informed like the really broad, sketchy land uses that are in the land use plan show that there's a portion of institutional use there to maintain a water tower and whatever infrastructure, some park along basically the slope facing the school, so the school always has the tree sort of backdrop, and there is a park, green space connection through there, and then some, it's sort of designated for multifamily housing, which was a potential maybe, but that's to be determined by this kind of study. But to answer your question, I think the water master plan does show the water tower being there as part of the long-term system.
So we'll leave this 200,000 in the budget for now?
Well, it would be helpful to get some specific direction from council. So as council is aware, we have a little bit of work ahead of us with respect to social and affordable housing coming down. That's been legislated from the province. So our planning department, although is expanding, we don't have those individuals yet. The question for council is not whether or not we want to undertake this work, is when do we want? Is this a high priority that we need to get it done in 2024? Or is this something that council wants to contemplate pushing out to 25, 26, or 27?
Is there any way we can phase that? Because it seems that the initial thing that always comes up is the site servicing. So is there any way that we could sort of break it out and say, well, let's find out what it takes to do site servicing, because that may eliminate the need to go any further, because it could just be astronomical, or it could be, hey, maybe it's possible, and then take it to the next level the next year. Sort of, rather than doing it all.
We could definitely investigate that. Sometimes there's benefit in lumping it all together because we'll get a price to do the whole work and they'll contemplate it and they'll look at it once. If you do it piecemeal, the contractors are looking at it multiple times and you pay a premium for that. So we could do an initial allocation, say in either 24 or 25, and then bridge that over to 25 and 26. So we have the initial work starting in late 24 or late 25, and if we need the additional funds because it's worth pursuing into the next year, we could always break it up that way as well. Or we could fund it, put it in the capital plan for whatever year, and then if we don't utilize all the funds, then they're there for another purpose later on. But we still need to budget for the full amount, regardless of what year it lands in.
Right.
Mr. Lawrence, can I ask you a question about, and I think maybe my brain's shutting off here, but at the HAF fund, would this possibly be, did we already have one kick at the can with the HAF? I'm just wondering if we reapplied or made another application. And I know for it was like a supportive housing, but in this case, if we said, hey, we've got some skin in the game, we have some land we want to use, with even potentially selling that off and putting that money into affordable housing, if that's an avenue for HAF, or no? Or did we just get one shot at that?
So there's two, I think you're referring to two different programs here. One is the supportive housing application, which is CMHC and BC Housing to fund.
Just the HAF, yeah.
Okay, then the HAF, we have an application in. As far as we understand, it is a one-time thing. This is, I don't know, $4 billion from the federal government that they're doling out this year. We anticipate hearing from them in the near term. With whether or not our application is successful and what that looks like. If the HAF application is successful, then yes, funding from that could go towards this. There's really no strings attached to the HAF program funding. Whether or not we get the full amount or a partial amount is yet to be determined if we are successful with the grant application. And there's a lot of competition out there. So considering what the federal government and provincial government normally does when there is a high demand for a program, is that they usually spread the money out and then focus a larger portion to their priority areas. So, you know, anything's possible at this point in time, but as far as I understand, this is a one-time grant application. Either we get it or we don't.
Right. Yeah, sorry, I confused that. Supportive housing, yeah, that's BCS. Sorry, but yeah. So, well, fingers crossed for the HAF funding.
Any additional questions for council? So, sorry, last little bit of direction from council. Leave it in for 2024, push it out to 2025 or 26. What is council's preference?
I'd like to see it left in 2024. And then when we get closer to determining the final tax rate and everything, we could always push it out by a year.
Okay. Yep. All right. Thank you. All right. I'll just, here's a couple of slides about those specific projects. Okay, on to roads. So, roads includes our Peninsula Road and Storm System project that is going to be starting up towards the end of January. The contract has been awarded. The Hazelwood Group is undertaking their administrative work in preparation for mobilization. They hope to be on site towards the end of January. So this is a long-awaited and we'll repair a lot of storm system failed infrastructure, which is really good, and also improve that center portion between Bay and Main. Actually, I should flip to the pretty picture. So this is being funded through about $1 million of gas tax. A resort municipality initiative is providing some funding. The CCRF grant is $750. Ministry of Transportation is providing some direct funding for the storm portion of it. The BC Growing Communities Fund, remember in February of 2023, we got an allocation of 1.14 million, I believe, if memory serves. So a portion of that will go to fund this project, and then about $270,000 worth of reserve funding to fill in the last little bit. So it's a significant project. One thing to note is this is does not include paving of Highway 4. That is still remains with the Ministry of Transportation. They have told us that they are planning on paving as soon as we're done, which means that the area between Bay and Seaplane Base Road will be repaved and resurfaced upon conclusion of our works in that area. Larch Road, that'll be coming starting in March. Again, this is the BC Active Transportation Grant that we were awarded. $200,000 worth of general reserves for it for our portion of this project, and that is to extend that bike lane between Matterson and Bay Street. So it'll to have a nice connection point directly to the school all the way from Seaplane Base Road on a dedicated bike and walk paths. So that's a really good project that we're seeing. I'm going to flip back to our road summary. We are also including in 2027 $300,000 for Peninsula Road Boulevard upgrades. So that is a continuation of the work that we're doing. We weren't able to do the entire project, but we wanted to keep that ball rolling. And we have $300,000 every few years to keep those works moving along to expand this the Peninsula Road Boulevard revitalization throughout the years to come. Any questions?
Just a question about the Peninsula Road work that's about to begin. Will businesses along there be given lots of notice about disruptions to their parking and whatnot?
Yes. So we are planning, we're waiting on the actual plan and dates of work that will be undertaken from the contractor. They're just working out what that schedule looks like. And then we'll be providing that to local businesses and residents and the community at large to advise them of the disruptions that they're going to see. It'll basically occur in February, March, and a little bit of April is what we're anticipating. But it should be fairly short-lived, relatively speaking.
Great, thank you.
Question about the resurfacing for 2028. Is that, I mean, that's not the paving of Peninsula Road, so it's resurfacing of just
Roads.
just random roads that
Yeah.
need it. Yeah.
The district needs to start allocating and planning for repaving of its roadways outside of Peninsula Road, which is the Ministry of Transportation's responsibility. This is, again, because we have a lot of expenses in the short term, we wanted to get it on the books that, hey, this needs to be done. So you will see that $300,000 repeated in future years going out throughout the 20-year capital replacement plan.
I just noticed it didn't have a fund assigned to it at all. So
That would be general operating reserves. Sorry, I missed that one.
Marine Drive in Peninsula, that dip. That's getting out of hand. Is that on the books?
There's a water leak there that they're still investigating, so we have some contract work that is happening in that area for a private landholder. We're hoping to maximize the mobilization costs for the company that's doing that work. So we're going to get them to dig until they find where that pesky leak is,
Right.
and then that'll be patched up as soon as we find where it's coming from.
Okay.
All right, emergency services. So our fire department and emergency response and coordination center. So we have tsunami sirens at the lighthouse that we want to replace in 2025. Remember, for council and the public, these were donated to us from Port Alberni, and it was a great donation, but they're old, and they're very hard to service. So we need to replace these to manage them, because they're kind of hit and miss right now. We're trying our best to maintain them in good working order, but it's very costly for a $30,000 item to get them serviced. So the fire chief is planning on replacing in full Cedar Road station first, and then in 2025 doing the one at the lighthouse. We don't have a third one planned yet, but it is something that we've been talking about for a while, because those two sirens don't quite cover the entirety of the peninsula. Out towards Big Beach, there's a gap, right? So that's also something that we need to consider in the future as well. But it's not on this 5-year capital plan at this point, but it is something we've been discussing. The kiosks, so those are the kiosks that just have a little bit of work left over that we're trying to get finished, so that hopefully that'll be done this year. Turnout gear, so as council will recall, this is fully grant funded, so this is really good. And I should say that the tsunami siren at Cedar, we are going to be applying for a grant for that one, so hopefully that'll be fully funded through a grant opportunity. The new big expenditure for this year, and there's two of them, is the SCBA. So I'm going to flip to the next slide here. So the SCBAs are the self-contained breathing apparatus that firefighters use so that they can enter and work within an active fire area, or anywhere there's a contamination, spill, any fumes or anything like that. These units are pre-1992. We have got our life expectancy and then some out of them. They're hitting the point where the fire chief is unable to find replacement parts to service them anymore. It is better for the municipality to replace them all at once and then maintain them than do it in chunks, recycling through them. So this is a cost that you don't really want to buy one unit every single year, because then you get different makes and models and changes, and it's a real nightmare. So we are asking for $200,000 to replace these SCBA units. Again, you know, they're 30 years old now. They're time to be upgraded. And this does include the bottles that go with them as well, and masks, I believe. Is that correct? Yes. Getting a nod from the chief. So masks, bottles, and packs. The turnout gear, that one is funded through a grant. As council will recall, that we were approved for that grant funding. So this is the new turnout gear, which will mean the old turnout gear will be the second backup gear for the fire department. And then I've also highlighted engine 2 replacement. Now this is $800,000. We'll need to replace this. It is a part of the requirements that's getting on to, it's 23 years old now. We don't have a choice in the matter. Fire underwriters require us to cycle through fire apparatus at a 25-year maximum. Here it is. The only other item in 2024 is $100,000 for the development of the not construction ready, but more investigative work for the replacement of the fire hall. So we do have the fire hall slotted for kind of 2027-ish at this point in time. Again, this could move depending on grants and available funding. But as council knows, that building is no longer serving our needs. It's not a disaster ready building, right? So as our emergency operations center, it needs to be a different style of structure, and it needs to be built in a way that can house the apparatus that we require for servicing this community for fire services and protective services. So again, some big expenses coming within fire and emergency services in the near term.
Quick question. How many SCBAs do we have or need, or I'm just wondering what that 200,000 translates to in terms of gear.
Through the mayor, at present we have, can you hear me on that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We have 14 packs, so the backpack assembly as in the picture there, and we have approximately 40 bottles. So you're required for every pack to have 2 bottles. That's a insurance requirement. So that there's a spare. So somebody's in a fire, we know there's an extra bottle. So currently we have about 40 bottles in our inventory, and each member has their own mask as well. So, so starting from scratch, we would probably look at purchasing about the same amount of packs. I would like to have a couple more packs because that being out here as well, and when we have any equipment issues, it's hard to get somebody out here today, this week, or even this month sometimes to service these things. Often when our members are out of town training, such as they have to go to Comox to do their live fire training, we have to bring our own air packs because every department uses, not everybody, but there's only 3 or 4 different types of different air packs. So we need to use our own equipment when we're out of town training. So that now takes equipment out of service. And we just cross our fingers while members are away at training. We have 2 extra packs right now that are on trucks, but often members are away 4 at a time. So ultimately it would be nice to have 16 packs and about approximately, off the top of my head, would probably require about 40-ish bottles and then about 30 masks as well. And this is also a purchase that I'm hoping to coordinate with Tofino somewhat because being our mutual aid partner, and they're also bringing this forward in the 2024 capital budget, I believe, so that we're using compatible equipment, which is important when we're on a fire scene. If I need an air bottle, I don't, we don't want people running around trying to find the correct air bottle when there's only 2 fire departments there. So it's important we're using like equipment. So hopefully that gives you a bit of background on that.
No, that's great. Just another random question because I'm that person. Would the bottles that you currently have, I know they would need to be hydroed and all of those testings, but I ran a scuba shop, love. I know all about these things. But I'm just wondering if they would still be compatible potentially with the new gear?
No, they wouldn't, because another pitfall with our gear right now is that it's a low pressure system. So it runs on 2200 PSI. All the modern systems now are 4500 PSI, which is double the capacity basically of the tanks. We're using old technology, which really reduces the amount of time that we can spend in an IDLH atmosphere and immediately dangerous to life and health atmosphere before we have to pull members out and change the bottles. So this would also give a greater working time. So we do have some, quite a few aluminum bottles still in our inventory, which ironically I donated for my previous department when we upgraded our gear there several years ago. And so I donated a bunch of bottles down here. And they have an infinite lifespan, but their usability is, they're becoming obsolete. We have slowly, in my time here, been converting to carbon fiber lightweight bottles, which are less than half the weight of it. It's a game changer for firefighters wearing a lightweight air pack. Those have a lifespan of 15 years. They still have to be hydrostatically tested every 5 years, but they're disposable at the 15 years. And that's the golden standard. I'm not even sure if you can buy a new aluminum bottle these days. So that's also something that we would have to plan for the future, to replace all the bottles in 15 years as well, should we move ahead and upgrade our equipment.
Awesome. Thank you for the information.
You're welcome.
All right. The next slide that we're looking at deals with our water capital projects. And again, this is a point I'd like to provide to council is this is typically or should be funded through our water reserves. Our water reserves are fairly low at this point in time, as with many of other reserves. And this should be funded through our water servicing charges. Our current water servicing rates only fund our operational costs, and they do not contribute at this point in time to funding any of these water or, and in the next slide, the sanitary capital infrastructure investments. So in 2024, we're actually looking pretty good. We have our water treatment upgrade of 600,000, and then the next 3 years. So this is the fully funded water treatment project that is going to span 3 years. So next year we're doing the investigative work, try to figure out in more detail the exact build requirements for the filtration system for our water supply. Then in 2025 we would start construction, and 2026 we would finish the construction. So it's a $9.6 million project that would filter out the Yuki Brown water and provide ongoing clean potable water. This will take out that discoloration problem that we have in the high levels of iron and manganese. So that one is it's fully funded at this point in time. The other one is the submarine inlet line. So this one, as council might notice, it's gone up. So we originally had it at about $1 million. We had $652,000 from the Disaster Assistance Fund approved by the province for that, and we need an additional $448,000 from District of Ucluelet from the BC Growing Communities Fund. We need to make up the remainder at this point in time in other means to fully fund the project. So the cost of this, it's the cost of engineering the underwater line has gone up substantially. So our updated costs are reflected in the new $1.3 million price tag. I would like to note that we will be approaching the province of BC to increase their allocation of funds to this project, because right now it was based off of an 80% funding model. Province provides 80 cents on the dollar for it. That was based on the initial cost estimates that we had, which was in that $900,000 range. Now that we have updated numbers on that, we'd like to go back to them and say, hey, we have real costs now. Please contribute more, right? The other thing that we should be looking at is looking at our other users of this line and seeing if there's opportunities for grant contributions or any other contributions to help offset the costs of this line. Looking further out, our water system, you'll notice there that we had $20,000 annually for cammering our water system. This is leak detection. It's best practice. We haven't been doing it. We know we have a lot of leaks out there. This helps us identify where those leaks are and make repairs, prioritize the repairs that need to be made on our water system. Matterson Reservoir valve chamber modifications. So Matterson, obviously right beside the UCC, there's some valve chambers that modifications that we need to do. We anticipate them to occur in 2025. The highway reservoir check valve assembly needs to be replaced. We're forecasting that in 2028. And then we've put in there construction of a duplicate 1,400 cubic meter reservoir at the highway. This is DCC funded, right? So if development occurs, this would be something that we would anticipate to be funded through DCCs. Any questions about water?
I'd have to go back, and again, this is going to be annoying because I can't remember how we left this off, but I remember, James, we were talking about that. This is the the submarine line that's coming in from Mercantiles, it's a secondary source, right? It's not the primary source of our water. Is that right?
That's correct.
I could have sworn that we were somewhat backing away from that because of the challenges that we were going to have with the filtration on the source side, with contaminants over there, like what was it, like the tannins and the things that were basically coming into that water supply were quite difficult to filter out. Maybe I'm just not remembering that properly.
Yeah, well, there's a couple of things there. So one is that yes, Mercantile Creek is a surface water supply. When the water runs high, there is high turbidity levels in the creek, which need to be filtered out. When the water filtration plant at Bay Street was constructed, it was completed with, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the acceptable limits for turbidity were accommodated within the design of the filtration plant. And then like 6 months after it was built, the powers that be in the Ministry of Water changed them, and that filtration system that we have at Bay can't adequately filter out the turbidity levels that we typically see from Mercantile Creek. So we were contemplating at a point in time, especially when that tsunami damaged that water line that goes across to Mercantile and provides Hitatsu with their water supply, whether or not, do we want to replace it? So we had two lines in there. One was damaged beyond repair and ripped out. The other one is still there. It is servicing, but it is an old line with the same strapping system and anchoring system that was there that was damaged with the tsunami that ripped out the other line. So if we weren't to replace this, then there's a really high risk to being able to provide a adequate supply to our neighbors in Hitatsu. So it does behoove us to actually replace this line, even though Mercantile Creek is a secondary source. It's always good to have a secondary source. Even though the turbidity levels are high, we might need to do some additional work there. And during the summer, surface water in Mercantile Creek is actually fairly low. So we'd probably want to consider additional works in that area, maybe even a ground source. So putting in a shallow well system within that area, if permissible, to get to eliminate the turbidity levels, and to see if there's actually underground water flow that would provide a more reliable source of secondary water. So there are a number of benefits and also a number of risks without replacing that line. If we choose not to replace that line, that $652,000 would go away, and you would not be able to get it back.
Right. Fair enough. Well, thank you.
Our next one is, and the one that provides me with the most concern, is our is our sanitary sewer capital projects. There's a lot of work that needs to be done with our sanitary systems. I don't think I'm going to go through all of the projects that are listed on here. I think I'd rather just open the conversation up to council at this point in time. Helen Lift Station needs to be replaced. Victoria Lift Station needs to be worked on significantly. We have an inordinate amount of lift stations just because of our topography of the peninsula, and all of them are aging out. They're old. They need to be replaced. It's very expensive. I'm happy to answer questions. This is just kind of an overview slide of what we're talking about, and it's just an idea of how the sewer system works, and the pictures on the bottom of that slide are what a typical lift station looks like. So your black water flows in, it pools in there and then gets pumped out on an ongoing basis. So it's the downhill gravity flows in, resides in the deep well, and then it gets pumped uphill to it hits the high point and then flows down gravity feed, et cetera, as it makes its way through to the treatment system. We have a tremendous amount of work to do on our sanitary systems. Yes. So any questions from council?
Are the DCCs are they at their estimates, I suppose, like going into the future? They're like this, like for example, for the upgrading of the 100 millimeter line,
Mm-hmm.
like there's 620. Sorry, I got a baby in the background.
Yeah.
620 from.
Yeah, so the way that we undertake the development of a capital plan is that we work in current dollar values. So we forecasted how much would it cost us today. We will update those costs as we go through iterations and get better numbers. So we look at our master plans, what the cost of construction is, and then we do a forecast as to what the total cost could be for undertaking the work. So when we're looking at DCCs, and that works, this is based on the anticipated growth outlined in both the master plan and our OCPs and what we know of that is coming down the pipes. And we slot that into our capital budget so that it's a line item to be identified and paid for through DCCs. And we can collect funds for these projects in advance or during the time that they are constructed by the developers.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. So the DCCs are those estimates are based on their current DCC charges. I know like those are probably going to increase eventually here, but
Correct.
those are that. Okay.
So as council is aware, our DCC bylaw is significantly out of date, especially with the cost of everything that has recently occurred over the last 3 years. It's evident that our DCC bylaw needs a major overhaul. So that DCC update will take a look at our plan projects, what we need to do for future growth. And remember, DCCs only fund growth. It will not replace existing capacity needs. So as you see on Hemlock Lift Station, it does note that there's DCC and sewer reserves allocated to it. The lion's share is sewer reserves, is where we need to fund that through. There is a small portion that would probably be attached to DCCs or DCC eligible, but most of it is going to be direct sewer reserve funding.
Well, thank you.
All right, so what are we looking at? And in total, this next slide is kind of an idea of what our capital expenditures are looking like over the next 5 years. We have about $9.6 million of items on the books for 2024, 8.8 in 2025, 7 million in 2026. 12, almost 13 in 2027. Now there's some big asks in there and considerations like a replacement of the fire hall. $6.6 million is probably on the very conservative or not optimistic side, not conservative side, sorry. So that'll probably increase because cost of buildings are just going up so fast. And then in 2028, 3 million of that 6.7 is the rec hall replacement that we're contemplating and need to consider. The big question is how are we going to fund this and what can we fund? Right. So this is all the things that we've identified through staff by our OCP, our sewer, water, roads, parks and recreation master plans all feed into these capital projects. Some big numbers there. So this leads into our capital summary. So right now, lends itself a little bit better scenario here. So in 2024, we have available funds of 7.5 million, almost 7.6 million. We're looking at about $2 million of additional funds that could be funded through a combination of DCCs, grants, and our existing reserve funds. Now, we're still confirming what those reserve funds look like after 2023, and we're just finalizing and reconciling those numbers. So in February or January, if council wishes me to bring this back earlier, we'll have a better idea of what those reserve funds look like and what that $2 million will definitely come down. Because we haven't utilized all of our reserve funds yet to allocate it. That being said, we don't want to deplete our reserve funds down to zero. In 2025, we have about $4.3 million worth of funding that is already confirmed. So you'll see $3.3 million for water, affordable housing's in there, harbor reserves in there. So that all lends itself to reduce that total requisition down. So we're still looking at about 4.5 in 2025 that we will need. And then of 4 million 2026, 12.87 in 2027, and 6.8 in 2028. Now, we need to balance this out. So some things will get pushed out beyond the 5-year capital plan because we don't have the ability to fund them. This is anticipated. I wanted to make sure that I was presenting the entire capital demand to council, so that we can start having the more difficult discussions about how are we going to fund this in the near, short, and long term. And that's the more challenging conversation that we're going to enter into next. Before we go there, is there any questions of council on these slides?
Just curious about building reserves. Is it like a general fund, or is there opportunities to sort of earmark reserves to, say, the fire hall, to say let's start saving now, to smooth out some of these peaks and valleys?
The answer is yes. So the way that I would like to move forward is to have an allocation, and as you can link it to as a contingency fund within each department. So roads, sewer, water, storm, parks and recreation, legal, emergency operations for, unknown events that come, tsunamis and stuff like that. Each have their funds. So council will recall earlier I mentioned the reserves bylaw that we adopted. We haven't fully funded that reserve yet, but each of those have specific guidelines as to what you can utilize those reserve funds for. Currently, we're not funding those. So the way that we fund them is doing a allocation within individual departments for what I'd say contingency funds, and those contingencies at the end of the year, if they're not used for emergency repairs, say to a water line or a sanitary line or something else that goes haywire, then they directly go into the designated reserve fund. Then you build up your reserve funds to smooth these out. What we haven't been doing, and council may recall in previous years we had this operational deficit that we were funding. Essentially, we were taking our reserves and paying for our operational expenditures out of our reserves. So we had this capital or operational deficit, and we were using savings to pay ourselves so that we can continue to operate. What that does is deplete your reserves and doesn't address your ongoing operational costs. So now we're no longer doing that. Now we have to reverse that trend and look at how do we fund ourselves into the future. And this is part of that asset management program. And that's where you're now seeing the 5-year capital plan. And this is our first, really the first time that I think we've presented a full 5-year capital plan. We've always had 5-year initiatives in there, but this is in the fully flushed out capital initiatives that we have on the books today. And it will change a little bit as time goes on and new things are uncovered and we learn more about the systems.
Are those reserves invested so that we're not losing to inflation, or
Absolutely.
Are they, okay.
Yep. That's what your director of finance would be doing as soon as I get a new one. The one things that we can't do is that they can go into like GICs and bonds. They cannot be invested in the stock market. We're
So
not
not
allowed to do
Bitcoin.
that.
We can't get
No Bitcoin investments. So and that kind of led straight into this slide here. So capital project funding process. We do evaluations from staff. We take a look at our capital needs. We develop a 5 and 20-year capital spending plan on what the municipality needs to invest in its infrastructure over the 5-year plan, which is before council, and the 20-year plan, which is fills in the 5-year from year to year. The funding within the operational budget of depreciation assets goes in. The dedicated contingency funding, which is what I was just mentioning to Councillor Anderson or Kennington. The contingency funding within the operational cost centers would then flow into your reserves, and then the contingency funds are then used as reserves to actually fund your capital requirements from, and then you also look at additional borrowing, grants, and other sources of funds that you can get a hold of to fund your capital projects. So this is where we're currently at with respect to borrowing. So this is what we currently have outstanding as borrowing. So we have 2 equipment loans, one that occurred in 2022 for $350. This was these 2 equipment loans were the ones I was talking about that we were planning on paying out. That we with the transition from the past director of finance, we just weren't able to pay that out. It just didn't hit the books. So we're still seeing those costs, and we're paying a 5.61%. And you can see the current payments there of just shy of $100,000 annually, and the amount remaining on those 2 loans. The fire truck also has a loan, and it goes until 2032. This is something that we cannot pay out. So once you lock in for a longer term loan with the Ministry of Finance, you're locked in at those rates. So we actually have pretty good rates for the fire truck that was purchased in 2017, and the UCC, we're at 2.8 and 1.47%. So that's considering the rates right now, that's pretty darn good. We could, and we will be considering whether or not we want to pay out those vehicle loans in 2024 to get them off our books. Because 5.61, it fluctuates with whatever the rates are, so it's a variable rate. It's better than what the general public sees, but it's still, as you can see, not very nice. Future implications. I wanted to provide this to council just to give you an idea of what it would cost to borrow. And part of the job that's ahead of me here will be to determine the best moves going forward for borrowing, or if the capital, what we can afford, and what we want to achieve. So these are all fixed term rates from the Municipal Finance Authority, so these are accurate rates. So the current interest rate on a 5-year fixed term is 3.8. On a $1 million loan, it'd be 224,854 with an approximate tax implication of about 5.62%. And that would be fixed in for 5 years. And then there's $2 million and $3 million comparative information as well. Now, as you go out the 10-year, 15, 20, and 30-year, you can see the annual loan payments diminish substantially, but your cost of that loan for servicing it goes up accordingly, right? You know, just the amount of interest that you're paying, and the tax implications of immediate tax implications are lessened. So, you know, there's different ways to kind of consider what we want to do to fund that short, medium, and long-term capital investment that we need. I'm going to pause here for a second to see if council has any questions or would like to provide any comments on borrowing at this point.
How common is it for something like, you might want to stick around, the fire truck, the previous one, which is now finished its useful life apparently, and we still have 10 years of payments or several years of payments on it.
Different truck.
No, I realize that.
Yes.
But that's the truck that we're taking out of service, right?
No.
Oh, we're not.
No. That 2017 truck has a 20-year life cycle
Oh, good.
on it.
So this is not the never
This
mind.
is not the same truck. It's
Have a good night.
the other fire truck. So yes, no, this is the one that is 23 years old, right? Needs to be replaced by 2020 in 2 more years.
This one that we're talking about that's on here though.
No, that is the other fire truck.
And that one's good till 2032?
It is good till 2037.
Oh,
I
a free
believe.
ride for a little bit.
And then if we request it, they will allow and extend that for another 5 years, which would push it out to 2042.
Okay. So we're not borrowing money with payments longer than the life of anything.
No, never.
Good. Awesome. I love it.
Any other comments on volume of borrowing? Would love some comments from council, how you're feeling about any of this.
Pay cash.
I think this meeting is very long and we're not thinking pretty clearly right now.
All right, I will keep going and we'll bring it back. So, borrowing against the BCF. I have this slide in here for council's consideration. So one of the things that we can do is we have funds that have been collected from the Barclay Community Forest. They're sitting at about 2 million and 2.3 million, I believe, right now. We can borrow from ourselves. So this might be something that we want to consider. Now, Barclay Community Forest, utilizing them for sanitary and general upgrades and maintenance, it's not really the intended purpose of the Barclay Community Forest Fund. That being said, we don't pay somebody else interest on it. And what we could do is borrow from Barclay Community Forest and then pay ourselves back. Based on the same process that we would pay into a normal loan from MFA. So what I've shown here is the interest implications. So right now, the equipment loan 1 and 2 that you saw earlier, it's 3,100 and 31,000 respectively. If we paid those off, that's money that we don't have to pay in interest. If we did a 5-year fixed term on 1 million, we wouldn't have to pay $190,000 of interest servicing charges for a $1 million loan from MFA. Respectively, if we did a $2 million, that would be $380,000 worth of interest we would not have to pay. But the corresponding tax implications are still that 5.62 or 11.25% increase in property taxes because you want to pay that fund back, right? But at least you're paying yourself rather than the Municipal Finance Authority. There's also a 10-year and 10-year fixed. Now, I only limited it to 10 years. I wouldn't really recommend going beyond that because we want to use the Barclay Community Forest Funds for other initiatives such as possibly the replacement of the rec hall, which is where those funds really were envisioned to help support. So this is something that I think is worth a good conversation for council to have. Are you okay borrowing from ourselves to fund our current needs? It would increase taxation, but at least we're saving the interest.
A question about the funds, the BCF funds. Are those invested?
Yes.
Okay, so if we borrow that money and spend it, there's an opportunity cost that's lost from that money not being invested. So
Correct.
That's kind of part of the calculation, would it not be?
That would need to be considered, yes. Yeah. But interest rates, as everybody knows, the interest rates are higher than the savings you get from the return on investment.
Right, but it's not a zero.
That's true. Yes,
Yeah.
very much so. Yeah.
And you did look into this, and this is allowed. We're allowed to do
Oh,
this.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Municipalities borrow from other reserves, and you must have a plan to pay it back. Really, your bylaw dictates what the funds can be used for. Barclay Community Forest really could be used for anything. It's up to council as to how you want to expend it. But because of the nature of the fund and where how that whole fund was envisioned, it would make sense that you would want to pay it back and not use it for, sewer services.
I'm curious about that. Like so many of the expenditures were limited by, what we can use certain monies for, and this one's unlimited. So, does it? Like, what was sort of the legacy idea behind the BCF? Like, is it again another one of these? It's for building new things and not for maintaining old things.
I'd actually give that one back to the mayor to comment because she was here.
Yeah, a legacy project with some signage that would say, this is brought to the community by BC Barclay Community Forest money. And so definitely not for water and sewer, but something that is tangible and important to the community.
Right.
There's no additional comments. I'll keep going here. So, water utility rates adjustment. So, these next slides, I wanted to present them to council for conversation, right? So, as I've stated a number of times, our water and sanitary rates are not funding our capital replacement needs. Now, our water and utility rates are spread a little bit differently than our property taxes. So, it encapsulates all of our water and sanitary users. So the water system includes all of the properties within the area C that utilize the water system. So by increasing our water rates, they also contribute to a higher portion, higher degree of the replacement cost. So utilizing and keeping it within our water rates is a good way to make sure that we're spreading that cost out to every user of our water system. Similarly, our sanitary system is the same, although we don't currently service anywhere in the Area C for sanitary, but we do for Ucluelet First Nation. So over in Hitatsu, so there's 650 dwellings. I think it's about 650 dwellings would also contribute to the upgrade, maintenance, and operation of our sanitary systems. So there's underwater lines. There's the treatment ponds that we need to upgrade and maintain. All of those would be funded through our water and utility rates. So I put in here sort of an idea of a contemplated adjustment and the total additional revenue that would be realized from that adjustment. So as you can see, it's like by a $55 increase in flat rates, and then that is projected down through all of the other rate scenarios, would only generate $129,000 additional dollars, right? So you might have to go quite a significant jump to actually generate enough revenue through water and sanitary rates to make significant impact in our systems. We're just not collecting a lot for our water and sanitary. You will also see that the metered consumption is only a penny value, and that is because it's all based on how much usage level you have, right? So there's a flat rate of about $35, I believe, a month, and then you have your consumption on top of that. So it's I can't give an accurate representation of what you know, a 16 cent per cubic meter would result in, but we did forecast it out and have included it in those projected totals. Sewer is the same thing, and again, this is because of that locked in 75%. Whatever we do in water reflected over into our sanitary system, so it actually generates less additional revenue for the same increase for the increase in water. So you have to either decouple them, increase the percentage, or look at some other mechanism to fund your sanitary system that's not that it has appropriate representation, right? And there are other options for funding. There is requisitions that we can do specifically for water and sewer. That is one-time fee that goes in there. It's like, you know, we requisition $1 million out of sanitary, and that is dedicated to sanitary fees, and it's kind of like a loan payment, right, that we spread out over a number of years, right? So it would be due for 5 years or 10 years or 20 years, this amount of money to do improvements to the system. And I can report back on council what that could look like later in the, or earlier in moving forward.
Can I just confirm something? The contemplated adjustment,
Mhm.
is that annually or is that 3 times a year, like on each billing?
That is the total increase. So that would just be one that would be divided by 3. So each bill would be 1/3 of that.
Okay, so that's per year, not per billing.
Yes, annually.
Okay.
So the total requisition for the flat rate that we have is $252 right now. The total would be increased to $291 for a flat rate fee.
Are you looking at water or sewer?
Sewer, sorry.
Oh,
Pardon
okay.
me, I'm looking at sewer.
It's just a quick question. How does this compare to other municipalities? Are we on the low scale here for charging our sewer and water rates?
I would need to get back to you on that. It's tempting to do comparisons to other communities, but I'd recommend that we try not to do that to a certain extent, because it's what our water system needs and sanitary system needs to function. So it's not a matter of are we being equitable between communities. It's like, well, we know if we flip back to our sanitary system, this is how much money we need. So we can either generate that through sanitary fees, or we can generate it through property taxes. If we want to maintain it at a similar rate to other communities, it means that we're just funding it through property taxes rather than user fees.
Potentially parking.
Oh, what a card.
So, this is the other part of it is now we know, what we need to generate. We've talked a little bit about borrowing. We've talked about sewer and water rates. What else should we be doing? So what we do know is that we have agreements with the ACRD, Ucluelet Government, Toquat Nation for fire service agreements. They contribute, including what the province gives us for responding to emergencies out on the highway, total of $63,000 annually. We have substantially higher costs. None of the capital has been included within those calculations for them. If memory serves, the Ucluelet Government Fire Service Agreement is $10,000 annually for the provision of a fire department and all related services. That is very generous. It's very generous. The ACRD, I believe, is $30,000 annually, or just shy of $30,000. It's based on a per capita calculation. So Area C, just outside of Ucluelet, gets their fire services for $30,000 a year. Not necessarily representative of the true costs of providing those services. Our water and sewer rates, again, I think this is something that we should consider opening discussions with our neighbors and discussing actual costs for maintaining and providing those services, because it's a huge tax burden on everybody, and it is a valued service. I think it's one important that we continue to provide, but there are substantial costs associated with providing those services, and right now we're not allocating those or not requisitioning the funds needed to maintain them properly. Here's your parking program. So I would like to note, I have not included this anywhere within the budget. I did want to bring this back to council for consideration. It is an opportunity to look at the funds if council pursues this. Kind of gives you an idea of the implementation costs, and I've received these from the airport operational fees and implementation fees, as well as Tofino's implementation fees. So they're loosely based off of what they're expending to start out. So we're looking at about $180,000 to $205,000 of operation and maintenance for $5 or $10 a day costing for parking, and then the projected revenues $460 or $920. So it is projected conservatively, as noted previously when we talked about parking, that worst case scenario is we'd generate about $280,000 at $5 a day, or $715 off of $10 a day for a parking program. This is money that would not be collected from taxpayers, that would be brought in. It's new money, if you will, and could make substantial impacts in our ongoing operations. If it is a successful program that council wants to pursue, these revenues could be higher. We won't realize and know the true impact until we implement. So I would anticipate that we would project the first impact of any revenue in 2025, not in 2024. But this kind of gives you an idea of what it would look like on an ongoing basis, kind of worst case scenario based on $5 or $10 a day for a parking program.
I see a lot of fire trucks in here.
I see one.
Well,
one a year.
I'm every year. Like look down here at $10 a day, we can get a fire truck every year for the next 5 years.
The chief will be thrilled. He'd love like 5 fire trucks. No, it's all spent on fire trucks.
I like the idea when I see these numbers. I mean, we talked about this before, and you know, maybe didn't have as much background information, but I think it's something worth exploring from what I can see.
There's always a risk, I guess, too, right? I mean, I've always kind of been against pay parking, but I mean, this whatever reduces the burden of the taxpayer and people in town, and it makes sense. And I mean, the only thing that I would worry about is if we implement and put down 100,000 right off, and you know, obviously we're not going to see the return for a couple of years, as you're saying, but my worry would be we put 100,000 in and people just stop coming as much as they did before, just, you know, in protest. But I don't necessarily think that
People-
would happen.
Nobody stopped going to Tofino.
But Tofino's, it's a different program there, though, isn't it? When like this is, you're saying like we do like the 5-day pass or the 10-day pass for the whole town, right? As opposed to just like paying a meter or having.
And I think this is more palatable than that, to be honest. And I mean, a lot of the pressure on our infrastructure is coming from tourists. So, you know, it's really not fair for anybody who lives and works here who's not involved in the tourist industry to be having to pay for the tourists.
Totally, and it is a way for people that aren't getting anything from the tourist sector that, you know, this would help them. So yeah, oof.
It's happening everywhere. So like we're basically an outlier at this point. You know, if people are not going to stop coming here because they have to pay for parking wherever they go.
Yeah, they're used to it.
Yeah.
And I think these
Yeah.
numbers are low, actually, from what we could get.
They're low but also encouraging. So.
The other
Right,
thing
right.
that I think is good about putting it in here is that it opens the discussion. And when the budget goes out for people to comment, they can also comment on this too. So, you know, I'm a proponent. I have been from the get-go. Everybody I talk to, tourist and non-tourist, is surprised that we don't have pay parking here already.
Yeah,
So
this
many.
this is a hell of a deal. It wouldn't stop me from going anywhere.
Yeah.
No, and people are already outlaying a significant amount of money to come stay, and say you pay $25 for a week pass, like that's not a big deal.
No.
I mean, even when my entire family came out, they would have happily paid the parking. I know they paid in Tofino,
The alternative is that our infrastructure crumbles and no one will come here.
right?
So
It's a lot of toilet flushing.
But
Yeah.
it is. It is. We want to keep the place nice, and we have to keep it up. And this is one way to help do that. So
As requested by Councillor Mafty, we do have a survey that we're planning. It's we're just finalizing it and getting some information that we could put on the website, as well as background information on what we're considering. So we hope to have that out in the next week or so for public comment, because I know that was a concern of Councillor Mafty about what does the public think of this. And so we want to follow through with that request. At the same time, we are we're moving as time permits to get an RFP developed and out there, so that we can really understand what the costs are and have real numbers for council. But I think that, you know, these are optimistic. Even if it's $100,000 a year that we generate that is net for the community, that's $100,000 that we don't have to requisition from property taxes.
That sounds good.
yeah.
Real good.
All right, so the last couple of slides here, because I know it's going on as these these budget meetings do. Water funding projects. So just a reminder, we started at 20.3. We reduced it down and confirmed in 2023. Sorry, 20.3 million in 2021 when it was envisioned, and got the new numbers back after COVID. It's now confirmed at 9.6. We still have the full amount of funding from the grant funders. We did start in 2022 an allocation of 3% at $37,000 a year to sort of offset the cost of borrowing that we knew was coming. And we're suggesting that we should continue on doing that. So by the time that we end and fully fund the project, that, that we might not need to borrow. The other discussion item is the infrastructure deficit reserve funding through taxation. So this slide gives starts that conversation of if we were to add in another, this is on top of the 3% for the water, dedicated 3% annual funding. This is what you're looking at on cumulative amounts over time. So if you keep on with the 3%, 3%, 3% over the years, and then in 2028, you notice it goes down, but it also goes way up, is that the funds collected through water are still collected, right? So in that year now where we marry those two up, and although we've generated $700,000 by 2027, we're no longer collecting for the water system anymore. Those funds can be reinvested back into community assets and infrastructure. So you're bumped up to an annual requisition of 1.5 million, and then you keep on adding that 2% inflation allocation to it to continue to keep up with the cost of increased infrastructure costs. Now, the one challenge with this is that in 2024, this is only $169,000, right? In 2025, it's only 301. That doesn't get us to where we need to go in our short term. One thing that I was contemplating today is, and I apologize, I don't have a slide for it, but if we do it, if we follow this plan and with parking, we would need to do, it would take us longer to be able to fund our capital infrastructure deficits that we have. One thing that council could consider, which is a difficult conversation, but one worth having, is doing a larger one-time increase to get us there faster so that we can address the infrastructure deficit that we have. So what I'm talking about when I'm mentioning that is don't do 3% annually every year. Do a 15, 20, 25% increase, requisition it now, and then the next year's is only a 2%, 3%, whatever that is. It's a significant request, very divisive in the community, but something that maybe we should consider, because we and we did I did a few very quick calculations thanks to Sam Parent, and I'm going to just drag this over. Sorry. So this is just kind of a scenario, and sorry, just a spreadsheet here, is that right now we're doing like 6%, that water 3%, and the proposed 3%, and we generate 240, and it's projected out. We over to 2030 we'd collect $5.5 million, right? Say we did a 25%. This is just for sake of argument and discussion. Is based on $40,000 of property tax a year, we would net $1 million. That would be forecasted out with a 2% after that at growth. We would have 8.6 million, 8.7 to help funnel into infrastructure deficits and address some of the challenges that we have. We even went up to 30%, just for a conversation. You know, that gets us up to 10 million by 2030. But the key thing, the conversation here, is that it's a one-time bump, and then it's 2%. It's a difficult conversation, and the reason that I pointed out there is that this would mean for if if your portion or a family's portion, and I'll take mine, I have my portion of municipal property taxes is about 2,000, give or take, annually. A 25% increase would mean an extra $500, right? That would provide us with substantial funding for our capital and generate more faster to address the capital deficit, right, in a more proactive manner so that we don't need to borrow as much and we can address some of the challenges that we're having. And it would let us do it in perpetuity. Because that you know, $500 extra from, you know, my property taxes would be there in perpetuity, and then it would grow accordingly. I wanted to throw this out there. I know this would bring us, you know, with even a 25%, right? If we look at Tofino, and I'm going to just slide back to another slide here, is we're at, inclusive of the other government requisitions, at 47, right? This would add $500 to it for an average household, right? You know, Tofino's at 7,177. Their portion of ACRD, hospital, and everything else is slightly more than Ucluelet, but not a lot. So their property tax requisition is probably, you know, probably another $1,000 more a household than ours on an average household. And I know a few years ago they did a 50% increase in property taxes because they needed to address their infrastructure deficit. I wanted to throw this out there purely for discussion, just to put it in the back of council's mind. I don't know what type of appetite there is to consider something like this, but we have a major capital deficit. We can do it slowly and gradually with 3% and 3%, or we can tackle it more head on. I'd love, you know, I'm kind of blindsiding council on something like this. It was a last minute calculation to get an idea of what that could possibly look like. And I thought I'd put it out there for council.
Well, I think you would no longer have quorum on council because we would all be murdered at the co-op.
Yeah, maybe we can add this to the survey.
Hey, we'll just need a resolution to go beyond 3.5 hours.
Okay, I'll make a motion to continue the meeting beyond 3.5 hours.
Second.
Councillor Kennington seconds. All in favor? And that's carried.
So, in my personal life, this is how I do things, but that's my personal life, and it's not inflicted on anybody else. So I see the merits in doing something like this, but I also, you know, one thing that's missing from that graph when we see all the different communities is, we have the highest cost of living in BC, according to the Biosphere Trust, with the living wage at 26. It's 50 cents more per hour living wage here than in Victoria and Vancouver. So we already have immensely high costs of living, and I'd also like to see overlaid median incomes, because I don't think, you know, a graph like this in isolation tells the whole story of what people can actually afford. And if people can afford it, that's great, but not everybody can. I think we just need to be mindful of that it's like, while we're having our eye on the prize of fixing the problems, that $500 is a lot of money to some people. Even to me it is. When I think about how much I pay in property taxes, like, that's going to sting. So, you know, just going forward, I want to put that out there before I get murdered in the streets for going any farther.
I'll probably get murdered at work tomorrow.
Just for hearing it.
Just for hearing it.
Well, my apologies for council. I was not intending to put targets on your back, but looking at our capital needs, I thought it wouldn't be appropriate not to throw it out there, saying there is long-term benefit, but I do understand and agree with Councillor Kennington, but we have to look at the cost of living out here. the last couple of years, the cost of living impacts on residents has been significant. This might not be, and probably is not, the year to consider this, but maybe it is something to consider in future years once we've caught our breath a little. Maybe after, if the parking program is actioned, then see what the results of that, and maybe this isn't necessary. But I still thought it was a discussion item. I wasn't honestly thinking that this is something that we would do this year. I would have been surprised, but I still wanted to have that discussion and put it out there that a significant increase does yield significant benefits to the community and our ability to address the challenges that we're facing in capital investment. And this, again, none of that it's not like a big boon for our operations, right? You know, our operations are our operations. Those costs maintain as what they are. There wouldn't be a magic increase there. This is all about funding our capital assets that we need to replace.
Yeah, right now, like when we're sort of, well, we're not debating, but the world is debating whether we are going to enter a recession or not, and we also have falling interest rates. Like, yes, now might not be the time, but things could turn around. But I just think there's so much pressure because we can say, oh, it's only another $500, but also the federal government is doing the same thing with your paychecks on CPP and taking extra for CPP, and also, you know, like, people are getting hit from everywhere, so it's not just $500. That's a percentage increase that people are seeing across the board from their mortgage payments, car payments, credit cards, everything. So sure, they might be able to afford $500 more here, but then the bank's going to come and take their house, or they lose their car, or they don't eat. I don't know. It's just, there's cumulative effects of these increases beyond just what we levy on people.
I think it's good to open the discussion about it.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. There's so many hits right now. And so I don't necessarily think this is the year for it, but I agree doing something sooner so that you do get that cumulative is great, but I don't necessarily think this is the year given all the other things, all the other factors.
I agree, and I feel that things are going to get better sooner than maybe people think, but just right now it's like a straw on the camel's back. But you know, just having this conversation, people should start thinking that that's probably what it's going to take at some point, and to prepare.
It's good. Yeah, it's good food for thought. I think it is exactly. It might not be the time immediately, but down the road, be interesting just to talk to people around town as well, and just say, hey, what do you think of doing like a 1 year? That's a bit painful, you know, moving down the road. Well, like, how would they feel? I mean, obviously most people are gonna not like the idea, but I don't know. I kind of find sometimes when you talk to residents, they get it, and if they know there's a problem with infrastructure and they know it's an imminent issue, I think I don't know. It might be an easier pill to swallow, and well, not at 25%,
but maybe spread out over 2 years instead of just one. Like, we're talking about going from 2 or 3% per year over X number of years to like all at once, but maybe just break it in half. You know.
Right. But yeah, I agree. Now is not the time. This has been a brutal year, and it seems like. Yeah, you're right. People are getting hit from all sides right now.
And there's still people that are recovering from COVID with their businesses, and the highway being closed this past June, and on it goes. So, yeah, maybe it should be done in the next election year.
It'll become an election issue, though.
I will. Like I said, I wanted to pull it out just as a quick discussion item. Because it is one avenue that we haven't explored. like I said, I didn't really anticipate that we would go down that route, but I think it was valuable just to open that door and say, you know what, maybe splitting it over and doing a higher requisition at 3% or more over a shorter period of time to make a more progressive impact on our capital investment requirements. You know, there's pros and cons to everything, and as council has indicated, and rightly so, there is a lot of demands on families and residents and businesses that we shouldn't overlook. At the same time, we still need to fund water and sewer, because without that, we have a problem. Yeah. So the last couple of slides here, I'm just going to go through really quick because I know this is a long meeting. So we are looking at recommendations, considerations, leasing or borrowing for the equipment replacement and immediate needs. Implementation of the parking program. I think that one is really a smart move, although I know not all of council is supportive of it. A commitment to fund reserves up to about 6% annually. You know, if council feels that there is an option to consider more, then I think that should be considered. But we can also do that once we know what the direct impact on the property taxes actually is with the operational requisition as well. So we can sort of leave that one until February, until we know exactly what we're dealing with. Obviously, we'll continue to pursue grants to offset capital costs. Moving forward with engaging with our neighbors, so ACRD and Ucluelet First Nation, about the cost-sharing agreements, particularly for the emergency services. I think that might be a smart move to open and start those conversations. Consider a long-term borrowing plan. And I'm suggesting 2025 is where we would enact that. We've got enough capital projects on the books already. We need the planning time to get ready so that we can be set to do that in 2025, and hopefully interest rates are better. All right. We might also know how much funds, if a parking program is adopted, what we're looking at for revenues from parking, so that we could reduce that. And then each new dwelling provides, my last comment was each new dwelling provides an additional $2,000 per million of assessed value. So, you know, with increased development, if there is increased developments in housing, we are seeing that already from the ones that are already built. That has actually quite significant impacts on spreading the load of the infrastructure requirements and operational costs. So it doesn't sound like a lot, you know, $50,000 of annual revenues per 50 additional dwellings is like, okay, but it's all cumulative, right? It's compounded annually in perpetuity. So a little bit of growth doesn't hurt. The right amount of growth and the right type of growth is definitely something that needs to be considered with future applications for development.
That'd be like a $500,000 home. Is that the math on that?
Yes, I think so.
Lots of
Like
apartments.
50,000.
Lots of apartments. 500.
Well, I always project on the low side and am pessimistic with revenue generation.
Yeah, well, there's lots of food for thought here. The idea of borrowing against the BCF and then pay parking. Those two things.
It would definitely help to get some guidance from council on these, because the next step is reporting back, and hopefully that is the budget that we're presenting to the community. So you know, direction from council. If I don't hear otherwise, this is kind of the plan before council. If you're supportive of it, we'll action it accordingly, and then bring you the results in that next meeting. If you would like me to pursue something different, or if we want to attempt to reduce our capital expenditures or take other actions, now's the time to provide those comments.
I had a quick question. The cost sharing agreements, the agreements that we have with Ucluelet and the ACRD, are those 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? Do you remember?
Depends on the agreement, but usually 3 or 5 years.
Yeah.
But we always have a clause in there that says we can revisit these as needed.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think pursuing the parking program with your survey is great, and I can't see a problem borrowing against the BCFC funds personally, as long as it's very clear that we're paying it back.
Is there an indication of a 5 or 10 year timeline? It can be any number of years, by the way, right? We can go 7, 5, you know. Those are just usually the terms. And then the amount, it would also be beneficial. You know, we can go anywhere up to about $2 million worth of borrowing from it if that's council's prerogative. It does help significantly, but we do have the associated requisition from property taxation to pay for that borrowing.
Are we talking about borrowing from the BCF?
Yes.
5 years seems reasonable to me because, you know, I wouldn't want to sort of hog tie next council, whoever that may be, to our decisions so that it can be reconsidered by a future council.
There is one other avenue. I'm not sure. I think I made a note, but didn't mention it. So, if the parking program is really successful, there is no limitation or saying that we can't pay it back faster. So any revenue generated from the parking program could be directly put right back into BCF until the fund is fully funded again, and that could be done in 2 or 3 years. And there's no penalties. Whereas if you're borrowing from MFA, you're locked in for those designated periods because that's how they work.
I was going to ask that. Yeah, that's it. Does that preclude if we do borrow against ourselves with the BCF? Does that preclude the some things like the rec hall?
It depends how much we borrow against, I suppose.
Well, I would say that the rec hall needs additional funding, right? So it's a matter of when you're actioning it and what available funds are there. So if we utilized all of the BCF to fund infrastructure needs and then started to repay it over a 5-year period, utilizing a combination of taxation dollars and parking funds, then we wouldn't be able to use those funds until they're back into BCF to be allocated for the rec hall replacement.
Right. But if you flush the toilet at the rec hall once it was done, it wouldn't go anywhere because you wouldn't have the infrastructure.
That is the current state of the rec hall.
Goes
So
into the
it's,
crawl space.
Maybe there's a priority here.
Right.
I think it makes sense. You know, we are at elevated interest rates and they are forecast to come down. So if we can give ourselves a little break until rates normalize to where they'll be around 3.5%, it's a lot better than what they are right now. So
For sure.
even if it's temporary, and again, why the 5-year makes sense to me, because I think it's going to take 5 years for rates to kind of find their real spot.
I have to say my gut says to be a little conservative and not go for the whole kind of 2 mil, but that's
What I'm hearing is that there is appetite to consider borrowing from Barclay Community Forest. We would allocate a portion of property taxes back into Barclay to repay it on up to like a 5-year timeline, and then, you know, if the parking program is adopted and realized, then additional funds from that could help offset or pay it back a little bit faster, if that's the appetite of council at the time, or you could just take the 5 years. So we could revisit that moving forward once we know what this program might actually do in real dollar values.
Mm-hmm.
So on a 5-year fixed borrowing against BCF, what would we have to add into? What's the tax implication there? 5.6. Right, for 1 million.
Sorry, no. So here's the implications based on the Municipal Finance Authority rates as they
Right.
are as of 2 days ago. So, you know, we can pay our interest rate back as much or as little as we want. So we can pay ourselves no interest if we want. But this does encapsulate paying the interest so that, you know, we'd be, say we took out the loan from ourselves for $1 million. The interest rate is 3.8. The loan payment back would include that 5.62, would include an increase in Barclay Community Forest Funds at the end of the day by 3.8%. So we are paying ourselves for the full cost of borrowing, including interest, right? So we don't
Right.
have to do that, which would lower that 5.62, right, by a little bit. It's not going to be a huge amount. It doesn't decrease by 3.8, right? But it would reduce that down.
What would like whatever rate it's invested at? You're saying the interest rates are higher than what we're invested in bonds or whatever it is we're invested in. Is there the opportunity there, or does it make any sense to pay it back with the interest that it would be making on its own, so we're not taking from the future community?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes, and we could do that based on, say, you know, a 5-year GIC, right? Say it gets us 5% if we locked it in for 5 years at current rates, which is reasonable right now. Then we would allocate on top of whatever we borrowed that 5%. So it would be like, it would be investing in ourselves and giving ourselves a GIC at 5%, and we'd be paying for that through a tax requisition.
Does that make sense? Because I'm starting to lose myself on there. But I just don't want it. I don't want
I
there
do
to be
understand what
less
you're
money
saying,
at the
yes.
end of the 5 years. I don't want there to be less money in the BCF. That, you know, that's the community's money.
Well, if the intent
Then
would
there would've
be,
been.
you could do it 2 scenarios. One, you could go, we're borrowing $1 million, and at the end of 5 years, there's $1 million. Or you can go, okay, we're going to borrow $1 million and we're going to pay ourselves the 3.8%, right? Because that would be the cost of the loan, or 5% because that's what we could have got for a GIC. And that would mean you would get the $1 million plus whatever that cumulative interest would be.
I think that would be more palatable to people.
Okay. And I would say that we would only consider borrowing as much as we actually need. We're not just going to borrow from it just for the sake of argument, right? So we'll only borrow the amount that is actually needed.
So if we did that, would that be a council decision each time that it was borrowed from, or is it sort
It's
of
part of the budget process, so you would approve it through this budget
Okay.
process. I think that's all. I've kind of mixed up the slides there for a minute. Here's the last slide. Really is the tax implications. So this is just to give you an idea on the average household BC assessment of $500,900 and $1.2 million for the relative assessment. We did just get the BC assessment roll in that came out on January 2nd, and we're pretty flat. Overall, what we are seeing is, I believe, a 19% increase in values for businesses. So remember back in 2021, businesses went down, they're catching back up.
so they're just normalizing, basically? Back
Yeah,
to
I
where
think
they
so. For properties, I can't remember. I think it's like a 1%, right, difference, 1 or 2%. It's very, very marginal. No major fluctuations. It's basically flat. And those total additional revenues generated by a 1, 3, 6, 9, 12%. Just for information purposes, this is also based on a $42,000 increase for every 1%. That's how I got those numbers. Now, what that actually looks like at the end of the day changes with the revised roll, and once we get more detailed information about what that actual requisition looks like for properties. So give that lots of wiggle room.
Huh.
So leads us over to the next step. So we'll do the couple of revisions to the operations budget. Hearing no adjustments really asked for on the capital side except for the skate park. We'll move forward with those minor adjustments there. We'll confirm the dedication of reserve funding. That is, once we know we've rolled over the year and finalized that, I'll know what those reserves look like and we'll start allocating those. So that's the finalization of the year-end expenditures. Then we go to those transfers. We want to confirm the funding of capital projects through reserves and new tax requisition. So this is a question for council. Do you want me to bring this back in a further follow-up report once I have those transfers in, or are you comfortable with me bringing back a budget report based on the capital and operations that you've seen today, and we'll show you the tax implications, and then there's always room to adjust those up or down based on council's desires there and prerogative. Remember, we have about 6% that is just dedicated to reserves, right? That helps us start that process of funding our capital assets. We'll present that in February if that's what you want, or an earlier report if that's desirable. And then the amended budget, if required, after the public engagement process, which is February through March, and then adoption of the budget in April and May after the revised roll, which comes out about April 1st.
Thank you. That was very clear.
Yeah, it sounds like you're our new financial officer.
It really does.
Congratulations. What are we going to do with all the money we save?
Yeah. No, I'm charging for both now.
Wait, I didn't see that under.
Yeah, I didn't see that. That wasn't any of the tables. I didn't.
No. Thank you. This is, as council knows, this is not my normal role, so I'm glad it made sense to council. I am not an accountant. We do have financial support, right? That is making sure that I'm not messing things up. But I appreciate that this did make sense to council, and I hope it was easy enough to follow. Yeah.
Yes, thank you
Good
very
job.
much.
Good job.
All right, we're going to adjourn this meeting at 7:54.
See you tomorrow.